Hello, everyone. This is Christian Dockstader. Thank you for checking out True North Project. So I'm here recording this in my van, my Sprinter van, or my Storyteller Sprinter van. Shout out to Storyteller. You can check out what I mean by that by checking out StorytellerOverland.com, I think is their website. But I'm checking out this van I'm recording this in this van that I'm living in with my wonderful life partner, Lily, and we have our Great Dane pup Kronos with us. So if you hear any growling, it's because Kronos thinks he's tough and he's in the van with me right now. But I'm just looking out over this beautiful canyon here in San Diego. Parked up right against the rim of it, and I figured this was a good place, nice, quiet, beautiful place to record this introduction to this conversation I had actually a couple months ago now with Jeremy Runnells, who is the author of the CES Letter. So I wanted to speak to Jeremy because, in short, his letter, the CES Letter, really changed my life. I came across the CES Letter in 2013, I believe, when I was about 20 years old, and it was a bombshell for me at the time. I was, a believer in Mormonism, and more specifically in a kind of a fundamentalist Mormon offshoot of the mainstream LDS Mormonism that kind of evolved. It's like a tributary of Mormonism that kind of evolved separately since like the 1880s, and has its own sort of polygamy flavor and its own thing going on. And I grew up in this small community, Colorado City, Centennial Park. So that was a real game changer for me, because this document, CES Letter, is sort of what I would call like a red pill for Mormonism. And it kind of paints a picture very different from the standard Orthodox narrative around Mormonism. And Jeremy is a real, I would say, pioneer, and also very courageous in putting all this information out there and doing, incredible amount of work to compile it all and to organize it in such a way that's really approachable and easy to assimilate and understand. When I say easily approachable, I don't necessarily mean like from a faith crisis perspective. It can be very difficult. So if you're listening to this, kudos to you for having the curiosity to explore the other side of the fence, so to speak, and to explore other possibilities, and to have an open mind. And I'm with you. I explored this topic in depth when I was 20, and it made huge waves and butterfly effect in my life, and led to me leaving Mormonism and the cult that I grew up in, and really going in a totally different life path and different trajectory. Now, just a quick caveat, I don't want to make this intro too long, because me and Jeremy talked for several hours. We talked for, I think, 3.5 hours. So I want to just get right into it as soon as possible, so it's not so long. But a couple things that are on my mind, and one is that this is not, like, True North Project is not a Mormon-themed podcast. It's not an anti-Mormon podcast or a post-Mormon podcast or anything like that. In fact, as a theme, Mormonism isn't really the theme at all. It's the reason that I decided to make this episode 1 is because it was really the very kind of foundations of me pivoting and trying to find my own, like, true north, like trying to figure out what was real, what made sense, what felt like something that I could, align myself to and orient my life in the direction of. And for the first 20 years of my life, I thought that was Joseph Smith and, all these, all that comes with the trying to get into the celestial kingdom of heaven and being married to multiple women and, having this priesthood and all this stuff. That was That was the paradigm I was in until I found the CES letter. So I see it as for people who are ready and for people who are seeking out the information, I see it as a powerful catalyst for transformation and for healing and for really evolving into the next chapter, molting the skin or shedding the old growth and giving rise to the new growth, right? Like giving yourself space to become, whatever that looks like for you, whatever you're oriented to becoming. I mean, that's an very individual path, an individualized journey. And True North is really about trying to reclaim sovereignty and, come to a space where you have more awareness of what's happening in your own life and your own reality, and autonomy and, freedom to choose and to do what you want to, and play the game that you want in this life, so that you can create more authentically and, orient yourself to something like ikigai, or something like your reason for being, or the unique thing that you have to offer the world. So, you'll be hearing about those concepts more if you stick around for True North Project and follow along this podcast journey, which is a very strange, weird journey that's kind of evolving sporadically and organically. We're just on a kind of a nomadic sort of odyssey where, wherever the road takes us and whoever says yes, as far as like the people that we want to talk to, and then also the people that we don't know that we want to talk to, that we're going to talk to, that we're going to meet on the road. It's going to be a really fun and interesting ride. It already has been. So I'm recording this, for episode 1, but we're already a couple months into this journey. I've got a few, conversations recorded that we need to release still. We've just been kind of backlogged. But yeah, this conversation with Jeremy was amazing. I was really grateful that he said yes, and that I was able to meet him, and that, we were able to engage in some sort of dialectic and try to really explore this, Mormon story, and, shine some light on so people can kind of make sense of what Mormonism is / how it came about, and kind of the side of the story that you wouldn't really hear in church or from the Orthodox Mormon perspective. So to give you an idea, just a couple of highlights of what we talked about. Like I said, it's a long conversation, but if you're a Mormon, or you're on the fence about Mormonism, or you're having doubts or questions or any of that, and you're here to get this perspective, I think you'll probably want to stick around for the whole thing. If you're curious just about Mormonism in general, it's not necessarily your background, but you've always been fascinated by it or whatever, this might be interesting as well, just giving you some insight into Utah, into Mormons, and I'm sure you probably know some. So this is kind of what we get into. So we talk about Jeremy's LDS upbringing and his subsequent faith crisis. He was a very devout Mormon who went the whole 9 yards with a mission and all that. We do a real comprehensive dive into the CES letter. We don't cover the whole thing because we just don't have enough time. So I highly encourage everybody who is, Mormon or on the fence or questioning or whatever reason you're here for, I just advise you to go check out the CESletter.org, just CESletter.org, and you'll have much more resources right at your fingertips. Not just what Jeremy's put together in the CES letter, but also the LDS Church's responses to it, and his responses to those responses, and the rebuttals back and forth. He has it all completely recorded and organized on his website. So he's done really a crazy job of just like a really scholarly effort here to make this really, really comprehensive and just put it all out there, so that really, I think in 2022, with this free access and with the internet age, and the fact that anybody can get this right now that you have the URL, the excuse of like I didn't know or I didn't have the information is really no longer an excuse. So, if this is hitting you, if this is reaching your ears, then CESletter.org is a tool that I highly recommend you go check out. But we dive into a few of the aspects of the letter just to give you a quick intro. We talk about DNA evidence of the peopling of the Americas, why that's problematic for the Book of Mormon story. We talk about anachronisms found in the Book of Mormon. An anachronism is basically something that couldn't have existed in the time period that it's being professed to have existed in the text. So, given the timeline of the Book of Mormon, things like chariots and horses and wheat just didn't exist in the Americas according to the archaeological record and all of the other data and science that we have. Those things were brought over by Europeans, like 1500 AD with Columbus and the Spanish and all that. So we talk about the how translator verbiage from the 1611 edition of the King James Bible that Joseph Smith had in his possession appear in the first edition of the Book of Mormon, and why that's important. We talk about the Book of Abraham, the papyrus that was translated from, and how it's actually just a standard Egyptian burial text now that we can read the Egyptian and see what it says. We talk about polygamy, polyandry, the suspect behavior of Joseph Smith. We talk about Dartmouth College and the kind of group collaboration of the Smith family and others in founding a Masonic religion. So this is just a flavor of it. And once again, this isn't a Mormon podcast, but I think this was a really kind of important place to start, just because of my own journey, but also because of so many of my friends and family and connections and network and social network having come from Southern Utah. It's just such a relevant topic for those people. But my intention with this is to just kind of like, I wanted to do this conversation so I could just get it out of the way, and really the rest is the horizon doesn't really look like Mormonism to me, because there's much more interesting stuff to explore. But for those who are coming in here, being faithful believers, I just want to say real quickly before I turn it over to the conversation with Jeremy, my intention with this is not to tear down or destroy or hurt somebody in any way. So just know that, I value like seeking the truth, whatever that means. So like when you see something, speak it how you see it, like call a spade, seek out truth. And if there's problems with your worldview, or in other words, if the evidence that you're seeing is problematic for your worldview, well, then that's your cue to sort of adapt the way that you see the world, and to let that evidence inform your own growth. Be the catalyst that lets you evolve and grow. That's really what growth is all about. It's like there's always an obstacle, a catalyst, a stressor. So this is what like hormesis is all about. The idea that you're, if you go to the gym and you work out your muscles, you'll stress them, and then your body will say, oh yeah, I need to build muscle, because it seems like we need more based on the stress that we've been receiving. And it's this kind of awesome anti-fragility that nature has, this ability to bounce back and to grow, and this process of hormesis. This applies not just to working out, but to growing your mind, to your attention span, to everything. And I would say even with spirituality, like in evolving your capacity for sovereignty and your own reclaiming your own connection to spirit, or whatever you want to call it, like taking the power back, so to speak. So I think that's kind of what this conversation is. It's that kind of stressor. It's that sort of obstacle. So you can do with it what you will. Obviously, if you're here listening, you opted in. So that's my intention. It's not to pick fights with people. It's not to tear down people's faith or just like cause blatant harm. It's, I think, a necessary step if we're going to make any sort of progress in the world, and specifically in Utah. It's like we can't keep living in the 1800s with our heads buried in the sand. So this is my podcast with Jeremy Runnells. I hope you all enjoy, and if you want to follow along with the journey, the nomadic odyssey, and future conversations and whatnot, you can check out truenorthproject.com. Much love. All right, Jeremy, thanks for doing this, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I mean, it's awesome to chat with you. I mean, I had no hesitations in meeting you and chatting with you.
Yeah, so for those who are just maybe never heard your name before, I guess if you're in the Mormon space, you probably have heard your name. A lot of people have heard it by now, I'm sure. But you wrote the CES letter back in 2013, right?
Yeah.
Spring of 2013.
Yeah, I'm the author of the CES letter. Like you said, I wrote in April 2013, and it's been quite the ride.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's crazy to think it's been almost a decade now, and
yeah,
a lot has happened since then.
For you and for me, because honestly, your letter made a big waves in my life for sure, which I'll get into later. Before we dive into the letter and into why it has made waves, let's talk about just real briefly your story. So you were raised Mormon in Southern California, and then do you want to just give us kind of a rundown of kind of what that was like, leading to your doubts in writing the letter, and then what the road's been like from then to now?
Yeah, sure. So I was born and raised in Southern California. I was born in 1981. My parents were both raised Mormon, so they met at BYU, Hawaii, and when I was born, all of my brothers were born in the 70s, so there was kind of a generational gap. My oldest brother is 8 years older than me, so but yeah, I had a really good childhood. It was filled with a lot of good memories. My parents both are great people. They got divorced in 1984, so I grew up in a broken home, but that's just the nature of that.
Kind of the nature of monogamy.
Yeah,
for a lot of people.
Yeah, but it was a very Mormon childhood. I reached all the different milestones. I got baptized when I was 8 years old. Mm-hmm. Became a deacon when I was 12, a teacher at 14, a priest at 16, got my Eagle Scout. My dad told me that I couldn't get my license without becoming getting my Eagle Scout. So I quickly got that because I definitely wanted to be able to drive. Excuse me. So the biggest factor in my childhood was my hearing condition.
Right.
Like that shaped and colored my whole experience.
It set you apart from other kids and
oh yeah. In a lot of ways it was there's a lot of loneliness.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I'm introverted. Like for the most part I'm an introverted person. Like I'm very comfortable being alone and in my thoughts and just kind of thinking internally. Mm-hmm. So I think that helped a lot. If I wasn't a introverted person, I think it would have been a lot more difficult because it's just the reality. Like Helen Keller once said, deafness separates you, like blindness separates you from things, but deafness separates you from people. And so I think that's a pretty profound quote. Like I
never thought about that way.
Yeah, like it really does separate you from people. And so my own life experience is a testament to what she said. Like I it's just the reality of how it went.
I wonder if had you not had that condition, if it would have been easier for you to be a little bit more like if you're super socially integrated in your community and your religion and your faith, then maybe it's harder to see things like that are beyond the pale.
Yeah, for sure. I think my definite I would venture to say that if I didn't have the experiences I had and didn't have I hate to use the word handicap, but like I just say condition. If I didn't have it, there probably wouldn't be a CES letter.
Interesting. Wow. Yeah. everything kind of, we're all sort of like uniquely shaped by our genetics, by our environment, epigenetics, and it all kind of leads to, the whole journey of us.
Like, it's funny that you mentioned that, because that goes into the rabbit hole of other stuff that I really started venturing in and over the last few years.
Yeah.
Like the illusion of free will.
Yeah, you got into some Sam Harris probably.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm still grappling with all that, and I'm still exploring, but
Same.
But here's the reality. What happened? Like, I was diagnosed with hearing loss when I was 3 years old back in the 80s, and I started wearing hearing aids. So, and then my parents divorced. Those two things just had a profound impact on my life and how things were going to go.
Right.
So I had no choice. I was a little kid. I was 3 years old. Like those two things really shaped and put me on this road that looking back, there was really, I wasn't going to be able to change it.
Yeah, and I guess I was destined to be a heretic, because here I am. Or here we are. But it's interesting, though, because like I totally understand the argument behind, the lack of free will, or, the illusion of free will. The kind of, to dumb down the arguments is simply to say, like, why do you do what you do?
Yeah.
Can you really say, well, I had the thought to do that, or I had the feeling to do that, or, but where did that come from? And why do you have those preferences? Why do you want those things? Why did you choose that over the other thing? So we're too complex to measure all the factors that go into a single choice. The thing I like to, because at the end of the day, whether free will is absolutely true or real, or whether it's not, the perception is the same. So my felt sense is that I have choice, right? It feels like I can choose to say these words that I'm saying right now versus different words, but maybe I don't have the choice. Either way, it feels like I have choice. So I like Stoicism quite a bit.
Me too. That's a great philosophy.
Yeah, and Stoicism kind of banks on this idea of like, hey, why don't you just focus on what you can control? And obviously, if there's no free will, well, you can't control anything, right?
Yeah.
But it's this felt sense of like, okay, I might not be able to do something about losing my hearing at 3. That's just going to happen. But perhaps I can, have my temperament towards that experience is sort of like up to me.
Well, let me add to what you're just saying there. So my hearing kept getting worse. I had progressive hearing loss. So it went from mild loss to progressive.
So you knew what it was like to hear at one point.
Yeah, I knew what it was like, and I could see I was losing my hearing little by little every year. And so, but what's interesting is after I came home from my mission, I started researching about getting a cochlear implant. So, long story short, just by getting a cochlear implant profoundly changed my life.
Yeah.
It took me off this road.
Right.
And I just like warp speed on a completely different highway.
Yeah.
So I went from using TDYs to communicate over the phone. TDYs are basically like back in the 80s and 90s before the internet. You would just use like kind of like a typewriter that was connected to your phone. And that's just how deaf people communicated. I went from that to having a cell phone in college.
And I got involved to make phone calls.
Yeah, exactly. But I needed practice to do that. And so what I ended up doing was getting myself involved in one of those MLMs.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's where you just call people around the country.
It's like the perfect job.
Yeah. And so a funny story is, I got a phone call from my dad one day, and he said, "Holy shit, Jeremy, I just got a bill from Verizon for $700. What are you doing over there?"
Yeah.
I didn't understand the concepts of minutes and stuff.
Right.
And so I just went over the minutes
because I was talking to everybody.
Yeah, but that experience completely changed. Like, I'm able to have conversations with clients. Like I talk on the phone for hours every day. But I just look back at that experience and the balls I had to just talk to people about bullshit. Like, I knew it was bullshit, but it was a way for me to talk to people, to talk to random strangers and in different accents and female, male, and so I look back at that experience as allowing me to have the practice and to train my brain to work with the cochlear implant systems.
Yeah.
And so you can say, well, the free will part is, I decided to get a cochlear implant. And
I mean, and you probably went through some grinding too. Yeah. There's probably some really hard moments and some tough chapters of a
lot of embarrassment.
Embarrassment. And honestly, like what stops so many people from trying to achieve something that they want, to get something that they want is just like getting out of their comfort zone.
Yes.
And you got to go way out of your comfort zone to go like talk to, like you said, you take speech for granted as how vital it is for human connection. And I mean, just go to Japan, go somewhere where no one speaks English, and you figure out really quick how hard it is to connect with somebody.
Yes.
You don't have the lingo, you don't have the language.
So yeah, that relates to a lot of my experience.
Right.
But and just think of the embarrassment. Think of the nervousness and the fear of, okay, I got to go get a sandwich at this place in Japan. And I got to talk to. I got to try to get.
Right.
I got to try to make this happen.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna screw up. I'm gonna get embarrassed. They're gonna get mad at me. So take that perspective, but make it permanent.
Right.
In your own land.
Then it shuts down your confidence to even try.
Yeah.
And then you kind of, like you said, can turn. You can put yourself on an island, right? Like where it's hard to. It's a feedback loop that reinforces the same behavior, and it gets harder and harder until maybe you're just a total recluse. And so it's really cool to see that you powered through that. I mean, that you took the steps and that the technology was able to give you this gift of speech.
Yeah, if you're going to be deaf, you want to be deaf in the 21st century.
Yeah, no shit. Yeah, honestly, it's pretty cool. It sounds like it took a bunch of stuff for us to even have this conversation.
Oh, and just think of the odds of that.
Yeah,
like
the odds of us meeting right now are actually phenomenal, because you wrote the CES letter in 2013, where I had a friend who was just like on Reddit and found this document in probably 2013, like right after you released it. So it's actually kind of crazy. Like we're worlds apart, but at the same time we're like close together, and like somehow I find this thing. It makes a huge impact and changes my worldview in major ways, which we'll get into, and leads to a whole sort of odyssey that I've been on, a journey through some tough shit.
Yeah.
Anybody who's got to go through sort of the despair and sometimes like bleak nihilism of trying to be on the other side of their faith or their belief. And figuring out what to do next. And so before we segue into all of that stuff, without running the risk of being too corny here, I want to set an intention for this, because I don't take this type of conversation lightly, because I know what it means to certain people. Do you know what I mean? And I know what Mormonism means to certain people. In fact, I'm just going to read real quick a text I got today from my mom. She says, the bottom line is you're not looking for truth or to build up. You're looking to destroy. Work to create good, son, to bless. You think you're free from the consequences of dismantling someone's life, but you aren't and won't be. And she's referring to me talking to you today.
Holy shit.
So she...
was that... that was today?
Yeah. So
that's heavy.
Yeah, it's pretty heavy, but... the only reason I would bring that up in the first place is because I want it, to be known that and I just want to be clear with both of us right now with you. I mean, people are going to spin whatever we say in whatever way they want, but the important thing is that where we're coming from, hopefully we have some common ground and alignment here. My intention isn't to destroy or to tear down or to put people into despair or to hurt anybody. In fact, the stuff I just mentioned about the early 20s of my life, where post CES letter, I coped in whatever way I knew how, which was chase money, party, drink, kind of like numb it out and listen to eventually start filling my life with things that actually helped, right? Like, elders like Alan Watts and philosophy and, experiences and psychedelics and float tanks and yoga and all these things that are actually very expansive that can, there's not just like this black and white of, okay, I'm either with the saints or I'm in hell. Like, those aren't the only two options. And my intention with this conversation is to shine light on and hopefully try to find what's real, what's true. And there's this interesting kind of concept called the Omega Principle, which I really like, and I'm trying to incorporate that into True North Project. So the Omega Principle is that you assume that every person you come in contact with has signal. So if I assume that Jeremy Runnells has some signal, and there's probably some noise too, my job is to upregulate the signal, and to where you say something that resonates, that feels true, that feels real, that feels like signal, I try to hone in on that. I try to upregulate that, and where there's noise that maybe I disagree with, instead of polarizing on it and butting heads and trying to make this into like an argument or debate, I try to be patient with and ignore the noise and find the signal. And if I do that with everybody that I come in contact with, that's just going to radically shift and upgrade me and my perspective, right? So my parents have signal, and they have, like my mom, for example, she's nervous because she's worried about this wave of like this, I don't know, maybe like an exodus or something, like some sort of apostasy wave or something caused by me, or whatever, whatever hesitancy she would have in me recording this conversation is probably because she has love in her heart for people, and she doesn't want people to be on the outside of what she believes to be the true path to salvation and exaltation, right? So she cares for people, and she's trying to protect people, and so is my dad. So I see their signal as well. I see like the love in her heart and the empathy that she has, but I also see the need for this, and so back to well, let's just shift to CES Letter, and then we can talk about kind of whatever we want as far as like the whole fallout of that and the narrative or sort of like my transition after finding it and whatnot. But I feel like it speaks a lot for itself. And so before we move in, just final intention is like I want anybody listening who is on the fence about Mormonism, curious, looking into other alternatives outside of, let's say, their kind of orthodox view of their faith or their religion, or anything like that, come into this with an open mind. Just like come into it curious, like you used to be as a kid, right? Like when you're a kid, you're curious and you ask a shitload of questions. That's all you do. You just always ask questions. And then at some point along the way, we stop asking questions because we stop getting the answers that we were looking for, and you start to get weird answers, like just put it on the shelf, just like shelf that one. If it's weird, if it's hurting your testimony or whatever, shelf it. We'll come back to it later when your testimony can handle it or something. Maybe God will reveal it to you. So just come in curious and with an open mind, and then I'll read this quote because you put this at the first of the CES letter. It's perfect. If we have the truth, it cannot be harmed by investigation. If we have not the truth, it ought to be harmed. That was by President J. Reuben Clark.
Yeah, and it's one of the most powerful quotes that can come out of Mormonism.
For sure. And I've been told variations of that growing up as well, where it's like, we have the gospel, we have the true gospel, it can hold water, the boat can hold water, it's not leaking, right? It's not sinking. So anything that you find, any truth you find, fits into Mormonism, right?
Yeah, that was the Mormonism I grew up. Is share, like wherever truth that you can find, incorporate it into our theology. This is Mormonism embraces all truth.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in a Mormonism that was courageous, that was brave, that felt transparent. We have nothing to hide. I grew up during Gordon B. Hinckley. He was my prophet, so to speak. Right. When you contrast it to what's going on today, I don't know if you've been paying attention to the Brad Wilcox situation.
No.
But basically he was giving a fireside talking about doubts. So it's doubts. It seems like that's the dominating theme or subject in the church today.
Right.
And so this is a foreign Mormonism. I wouldn't recognize this Mormonism. The Mormonism of my youth is dead, period. The essays killed it. The internet killed it.
Right. So the one that I grew up in, because it was already this different flavor where it was more niche. So you grew up LDS. I grew up in an offshoot that traces its lineage of priesthood. I'm gonna make jokes and laugh because to me it's like how you get through the ugly shit. You laugh about it, right? But their magic secret sauce came from a revelation in the 1880s. Basically John Taylor, and kind of taking the priesthood, the true priesthood underground, and polygamy underground, and starting this sort of fundamentalist tributary offshoot of LDS Mormonism, and that fractured in many times, I'm sure, into many different groups, but eventually led to some men settling in Colorado City and starting a faction of it there, their own flavor, where they could practice full-on polygamy. And because it wasn't trying to be the popular church, you see what I mean? It wasn't trying to be like the transparent thing where it's like, yeah, we can, shine a light, we're fine, right? And then oh no, there's problems. It was more like, don't go looking.
Yeah.
It was more like that for me. It was like, don't go looking. And it didn't feel like, I was taught in high school in world history by an adult, by a man in his 50s, maybe his 60s at the time, that the earth was thousands of years old.
Wow.
I was taught creationism, and I was taught that the age of the earth was thousands, not billions of years old. So that's the type of insular sort of society that it's created when you're clinging to something for dear life, and you don't want to let the light in. You don't want to let the thing in that's going to disrupt or dismantle your little reality, right? It's like Plato's allegory of the cave, I think, is a perfect analogy for this.
Yeah. The Matrix. You could go on, yeah.
For sure. Okay, and then there's another quote here from Joseph Fielding Smith, who was another president of the church. Mormonism, as it's called, must stand or fall on the story of Joseph Smith. He was either a prophet of God, divinely called, properly anointed and commissioned, or he was one of the biggest frauds this world has ever seen. There's no middle ground. If Joseph was a deceiver who willfully attempted to mislead people, then he should be exposed, his claims should be refuted, and his doctrines should be shown to be false.
Yeah.
I agree with them. Yeah. There's only black or white here in this territory.
Exactly. And I agree with them 100%. And Gordon B. Hinckley came out with, he said similar stuff. The church is either true or it's a fraud.
Right. I guess the only middle ground would be if he was buying his own bullshit and he was a fraud, but he truly believed it somehow, he was some kind of delusional, something like that. Maybe he was taking some mushrooms and and he thought he was onto some stuff. I don't know.
Yeah, but the reality is that Mormonism is a very conservative, black and white religion, and it demands a lot from you.
Mm-hmm. I was told, demands the sacrifice of all earthly things.
Yes.
Everything.
Yeah, so if you're going to devote your life to this, and all your time and money and your whole framework is dependent on this system, this framework, this theology, then you better make sure that you're on solid ground here.
Yeah, and it should hold up to the investigation, right?
Yeah, that the math computes.
Sure, and it should balance the equation, and it should hold up to investigation, like Reuben Clark said. So,
exactly.
All right, so let's without further ado, because there's a lot of content to cover, and we could be here all day. So I'll try to do my best to make sure we move through stuff.
Cool.
I'll start with the Book of Mormon, because that's the only place to start, right?
Yeah, it's the keystone of our religion.
It's everything. It's for Mormonism. Book of Mormon it's a Book of Mormon. It's a book of it. And so, and in fact, here's the quote you were just referencing. The Book of Mormon is the keystone of our testimony. Just as the arch crumbles if the keystone is removed, so does all the church stand for fall with the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon.
Yeah.
So without the Book of Mormon being what is it? Let's just stillman the Mormon argument of what is the Book of Mormon. Like if you were a missionary telling me what it is.
Yeah, so the Book of Mormon is sacred scripture that at the end of the day came from God, and it was brought forth by divine commission to Joseph Smith. So where we get into funny territory here is the script that I use as a missionary doesn't really work nowadays.
Oh, they changed it?
Well, yeah, they speak out of both sides of their mouth.
Okay.
So as a missionary, you teach about gold plates. That in Danger Moon, I brought the gold plates to Joseph Smith, and he translated it by the gift and power of God.
Mm-hmm.
Well, nowadays it's he used the rock in a hat to translate. It wasn't really, perhaps not a translation, but more of a revelation.
Right.
So, like, the story is changing underneath our feet on the origins of this book.
Yeah,
so,
it's funny because I'm just thinking, I think it's really cool that we're having this conversation because we actually have different backgrounds and flavors of this. And my story, or what I should say is the story around, like, the Mormonism I grew up with, it's not changing. But they're doubling down. You see what I mean? So the plates, it's all about the translation of the plates still. So, in other words, I think the LDS Church does have this sort of like pressure because it's so big and so popular and such a big, widespread phenomena that it has to sort of adapt and evolve with the times.
Yes.
And with the internet, right?
Yeah.
But when you're in a smaller, more insulated society, you can sort of bury your head in the sand a little bit more and try to not look too deeply at those things, right? Those other uncomfortable.
Do they talk about the rock in the hat?
The first time I ever heard anything about it was in the CES Letter.
Interesting.
In 2013. And I've never... So I have a hard time. I can't speak for what they talk about so much because nobody's really open to engaging with me about what they believe. Like really engaging with me, right? Like in a way where we can actually talk. Like, well, what happened and what do you believe? It's more instantly into the emotional territory of like these are my beliefs. This is my faith, and obviously like there's just a wall there that I'm never going to break down or change, and I don't need to or want to. But it's hard for me to get like a real sense of like, well, what do you think about this? Because I haven't had anybody willing to really engage with me, which is kind of surprising because both of my parents are kind of like points of contact, so to speak, for people like, let's say, inquiring about like Centennial Park or like what does Centennial Park believe, or somebody's maybe interested in visiting or joining the religion. They're gonna land on somebody like my parents. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
My dad's a patriarch of the church, and so he's the guy, one of the guys that's like the champion of the religion and can articulate the beliefs and the perspective, but we can't sit down and have like a conversation without it immediately getting in the weeds and into just like it gets shut down, right? We're not going to have a conversation like this one about like, well, what actually happened. So as far as the rock and the hat thing, we'll get into that later on the translation. Let's just go into the book itself. So it's a not only a revelation from God.
Well, it depends on who you talk to. Some would say translation.
Okay.
But more the apologists or like more the progressive Mormons will acknowledge that there's a rock in the hat, and
right,
and the word changes from translation to revelation.
But do they deny that the plates existed though?
So in Orthodox Mormonism, the plates are are still front and center.
Sure.
You still have missionaries talking about it. With the more progressive Mormons and apologists, they will acknowledge that, yeah, the plates were buried in the woods or covered with a cloth. They weren't really used like we thought they were.
For sure, but they acknowledge that Moroni led Joseph Smith to plates.
Yes.
And so that's still part of the faith. Like, that's still an important facet, right? And so when we're talking about what are the plates, you can't skip over, well, what are they? Like, where did they come from? Like, what are the actual plates themselves, right? Because we can say the Book of Mormon is a revelation from God via Joseph Smith, even if it was through a hat and a rock, which sounds silly to even say that. But, like, if it did come from his rock and a hat revelation, so be it. It could, if you want to believe that, you can believe it.
But it's not as simple as that. Like, we can get into the weeds with what they call a tight translation versus a loose translation. And there's like problems with that narrative.
Of course, but there's obviously the whole thing is I mean, to even have faith in that, you have to put up a lot of blinders. But what I'm getting at is,
and by the way, I'm sorry, like, it's not just the weirdness aspect of that. It's that Joseph Smith has a history of treasure hunting.
Oh, I know. There's lots of reasons. Yeah. We'll go into them. There's so many reasons not to believe it was a revelation.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, but what the plates actually signify, if they existed, are a artifact of a lost civilization that existed in the Americas, that was peopled, that was populated, that was founded by the family of Lehi, a character who sailed across the massive ocean
in submarines.
Without
a dish or whatever.
Yeah, in a vessel that didn't have any way to propel
windows.
itself.
Well, they had a window, but yeah, it's all funny.
Yeah, it's like a vessel without windows and without a propeller or a sail or anything. Anyways, so he comes across from Jerusalem with his family into the Americas, settles there, and then you get this like thousands of years of civilization, and eventually the fall of that civilization, the loss of their legacy, so to speak, except for what's been preserved by God via Moroni. So these plates are the story. They're the proof. They're the legacy of a lost civilization of the Americas that's been peopled by Lehi from Jerusalem. Would you say that's pretty accurate?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty accurate. It's yeah, and then that was the story, but in the at least in the LDS Church, in the front of the Book of Mormon, they used to call the Native Americans the principal ancestors.
Yeah, principal ancestors, exactly.
But now because of DNA, the pesky science.
DNA is the first thing we got to go into.
Yeah. Sure. The DNA really changed that, and so they changed it from principal ancestors to among the.
Right, but it's not just an artifact of a lost civilization, according to Mormonism. It's also a historical record of the Americas prior to European contact. Okay, so now if this is divine, of God, revelation, truth, we can believe Joseph Smith's a prophet, right? If we're going to go on that faith and this is legit, then that should hold up as true. Then there should be honestly evidence all over the place in all kinds of different domains.
Yeah, like I compare it to the evolution debate. Well, not debate, but there's DNA and there's the fossil record.
Yeah, archaeology.
Yeah, there's all these fields of science
that all point to the same thing.
Exactly. So there should be a similar thing for the Book of Mormon.
That's the beautiful thing about the scientific method, is all it's saying is let's go on a quest of inquiry here, where we are open to discovering and being wrong. We're open to being wrong. In fact, we know that our hypothesis is actually wrong on some level. Like, on some level, it's incomplete. It's not the full answer. It might not even be the right question, right? So we have to go in curious and open-minded and being willing to change our perspective on our view. And when you have a whole community or a species taking on that undertaking and in that inquiry, well, then it starts to shift your whole perspective of reality. And that's what the Renaissance was. It's like the shift from all of the truth, all of the answers come from this book. And by the way, we'll interpret it for you and we'll read it to you, right? Like what the priesthood will. The priest, the
like
priest
when the printing press showed up.
Yeah.
And it democratized the information, the access.
Democratized the information, yeah.
It
changed everything. It actually rewrote the map of Europe with the 30 Years' War. So the printing press shifted like you said, democratized the flow of information, and it completely changed the trajectory of our species, and it led to a scientific renaissance. It led to a new age of man, really.
Yeah.
And all this innovation that's kind of crept out of that. So it's interesting, though, that we still have this sort of artifact in the sense, not the plates, but we have this artifact of the medieval ages, this idea of like cleaving to and holding on to the truth that you have, right? That is the truth. And, we've heard it in Mormonism. Mormonism contains all the truth, so it should all fall into the Mormon basket. It's like, well, then that means you should be archaeologists, and you should be astronomers, and you should be physicists, and you should be all these people, all these things that are seeking, looking, asking questions, right? Because all the answers fall into the truth basket of Mormonism, right? So if we just paint the picture real quick that this is the premise, that these people of the Americas, this story of Lehi peopling the Americas is the truth, and that these plates represent a lost civilization, then we should be able to find the traces of the civilization. Mm-hmm. Okay. Sweet. So now let's go to the issues with the Book of Mormon. To me, the first one, the first top of the list, I don't think you listed it first, but to me it's the most egregious, is the DNA inconsistencies of the Native Americans. Yeah. I think if there's a smoking gun to the whole thing, to me that's the most obvious one.
Look, DNA is solid. Mm-hmm. We're putting people on death row over DNA.
Yeah. Yeah, if you jizz after you murder somebody, like if your jizz is on the scene, you're in trouble.
Yeah, like in a court of law, when DNA is presented, it's not about, the DNA is wrong. It's, maybe it was contaminated when it was stored in the evidence room over the decades.
Right.
So they're not arguing over the science of DNA. They're arguing, maybe it was mixed up, or like DNA is just solid. It was so solid that the church changed its position from principal ancestors, the principal ancestors, to among them.
Yeah, so the church doesn't want to deny, the church meaning the mainstream LDS church, doesn't deny that the science of DNA studies, or...
Well, they have an essay that came out called DNA in the Book of Mormon, I believe it's called. But we could get into the weeds, and there's like a lot of mumbo jumbo, but the bottom line is the DNA has changed the church's narrative.
Sure. Changed the actual words from principal ancestors to among the ancestors.
Yeah, and how they teach about these ancient civilizations. Like, it used to be just like a close book, like just solid. Like, like they came across the ocean to, like, on the Atlantic side over to the Americas. But now it's, maybe they got mixed with some civilizations that were already here when they arrived. Instead of an empty continent, it's, maybe there were people here when Lehi and co arrived.
Yeah, because they don't want to let go of the narrative of Lehi coming over.
Exactly.
But okay, so let's just from a DNA perspective, look at what we see. The current standard narrative, as far as I understand it, and correct me if I'm off here, is that the human migration patterns across the world are actually pretty clear, and because of DNA evidence. And so what I mean by DNA evidence is, I don't know, maybe in was it the 80s or 90s they sequenced the genome for the first time?
I believe it was the 90s? The late 90s.
It was like $1 billion project to sequence the genome and map the human genome. It was like a massive undertaking, and because of Moore's law and various technological, the evolution of our technology has led to DNA being easy now. I mean, you can get 23andMe done. You can go get your DNA tested, and you can see your ancestry, like where it's coming from.
They're even talking about revolutionizing how we store information.
That's crazy.
That we can store it
because it's like the most
DNA,
efficient
structures.
Yeah, DNA is like the most efficient way to store information in the universe.
Yeah,
it's insane.
It's insane.
It's really amazing. It tells a story.
Yeah.
It tells a story. So this is what's fascinating, right? Like with DNA evidence, you can find, and they have found, let's say a tooth, because teeth are hard and they last for a long fucking time. So they found a tooth in a cave in Siberia. So this archaeological dig found a human tooth, and this tooth proved that a species other than Homo sapiens lived, they call them Denisovans, but Australopithecus or whatever it is, right? It's another bipedal great ape, like in the same family.
That's a separate subject. That's fascinating. How there are multiple human species. They existed at the same time.
Yeah,
and we ended up becoming the victors.
And we also ended up breeding with some of these, like Neanderthals, for example.
Yeah, when I did the 23andMe, I have a percentage of the Neanderthal DNA.
Yeah, it's fascinating that some of there was some interbreeding going on, right?
Yeah.
But we probably wiped them out. Anyways, the fact that you can date a carbon date a tooth to 300,000 years old, and then you can get the DNA from it. Like you can sample it and test it and figure out that this is like a different type of hominid than a Homo sapien, right? And then that's led to this whole revolution of DNA science, where now we're finding like that type of DNA in people like Jeremy, right? Like you've got like some sort of like ancestor way back that was this other type of hominid, right? So those are hard. Those are like long time periods. 300,000 years is a long time, right? We're not talking about that. We're talking about what was Lehi coming to the Americas estimated to be 3,500 BC.
I think it was, I forget the dates, but it was. I mean, it's just we're talking thousands of years.
We're talking less than 10,000 years, probably more like.
I think it's like 600
5,000
BC,
years.
700 BC, somewhere around there.
Oh, really?
And then the end of the Book of Mormon was 421
Okay,
AD.
so we're talking about a few thousand years max. Okay, so we're talking about a few thousand years max. There are sites. I mean, nature does a pretty good job of covering up the evidence and erasing,
there's like layers.
And erasing, but it also does a great job of preserving things too, like a tooth. It preserves the story. So Joseph Smith,
like tree range.
Yeah, exactly. That's like the tree's version of like DNA, in a way. So Joseph Smith lived in a time not only with a lot of superstition and magical thinking and treasure hunting and witch burning and slavery and lots of things that we would kind of look back on and be like, oh yeah, we've evolved from a lot of this thinking, right? But he lived in a time without the internet. He lived in a time without Google. He lived in a time without sequencing the genome. He had no idea what the fuck a genome was. Yeah, you see, he had no idea what DNA was. DNA hadn't been discovered until like the 60s or 70s.
The Rosetta Stone that completely changed our understanding.
Egyptian.
Like that was just discovered like 6 years before the Book of Mormon.
Right. And so we're gonna dive into the translation with the Egyptian in a minute. But as far as DNA goes, here's a guy who's completely ignorant of this concept of DNA. So he's telling this story with no even inkling of an idea that one day there will be obvious proof that what he's saying is falsifiable, right? And that's the thing is, before we really dive deep into like how to falsify this argument, first you have to ask the question, am I in a position where I'm allowing my thinking to even be up for like to be falsified, right? In other words, that's scientific thinking. It's like if my hypothesis can be falsified, then it's a good hypothesis. Then I can be like, okay, I was wrong or I'm right because I can prove it either way. But if you say, like if you have some sort of like belief that, it's the truth no matter what. So I went to a funeral out in Centennial Park a couple weeks ago, and I heard something that really struck me, and I remembered I used to hear this all the time, but I kind of forgotten. And what I heard was the gospel's true whether I believe it or you believe it or anyone believes it. The gospel's true. That's what I heard. And he said it in a way that was like this sort of like declaration of faith that was supposed to be inspiring. That was supposed to be like, oh, I believe my testimony is so strong that I'll say this, right? That's the stupidest fucking thing I've ever heard. That's an unfalsifiable hypothesis.
Yeah.
That is the opposite of scientific thinking.
Yeah.
If you can't prove something to be false at all, like then, and if it's unfalsifiable, then you're just in a you have a circular argument.
Yeah, exactly.
Where it proves itself, and no amount of evidence will ever be able to be enough. Right.
Exactly.
So if we're in the territory of like we're open-minded enough to consider that we could be wrong, then we can move forward, and we can actually look at stuff with an open mind. And if any of it is like anything that we're saying is we're full of shit, then a rational argument could easily make a case and take us down.
Yeah, that's why I've been so fascinated with epistemology the last few years.
Right.
Epistemology is basically the science of like, how do you know what you know? How did you arrive to that conclusion? Was the method and the source that you used to arrive at that conclusion, was it reliable?
Right.
Is it reliable? It just really starts getting you thinking about how did this all start to begin with?
And it always comes down to testimony. It comes down to faith.
Yeah.
When we're talking about Mormonism.
And so, the first half of my life, I lived by faith because that's how I was programmed to base my life on. This part of my life is based on evidence.
Right.
Okay, that's an interesting hypothesis. That's an interesting theory you got there. Let's look at the evidence. Let's look at the epistemology here, because I'm not gonna take my wallet out and my money and give you my money unless it's solid. To me, that's a more reliable, safer way to live your life. I'm seeing too many, for example, baby boomers in their 60s and 70s just discovering all this stuff because they didn't use epistemology.
Right.
And they're getting screwed.
Yeah.
They're starting to realize, shit, I just wasted my life on something that I didn't sit down on one Sunday afternoon and really get down to the epistemology of this. It's just as reliable as I think it is.
And there's a lot of reasons why that's the case. I mean, it's hard to even want to look or have any desire to look when, you've got a whole tidal wave of momentum behind you, pushing you in the not look direction. Like everybody that I'm friends with, and
they keep you busy.
Yeah, if I'm going to my meetings and I'm in brotherhood with these men, and we're all reaffirming. We've created an echo chamber where we're reaffirming each other's perspective, right? So there's a lot of reasons why people don't even go looking, right?
Yeah.
But it's funny because something I was reminded when you're talking about looking for evidence and doubting. Story of Thomas and in the Bible, doubting until as soon as I see that he's back from the dead, then I'll believe it. Do you see what I mean? He's like a doubting Thomas or whatever. Yeah,
from a secular perspective, what's wrong with that? But in a religious perspective, they mock and scorn him, oh, he didn't believe.
Yeah, to be my good and faithful servant. To be faithful is to be good.
Yeah.
Which is also to be blindly obedient.
Right,
to be
exactly.
Good. Right. So with DNA, before we move on from DNA, the evidence of the standard narrative suggests that the migration patterns of humans when it comes to the Americas is across the Bering Strait land bridge from Siberia. And the reason that this is the standard
tens of thousands of years ago.
Tens of thousands of years ago during the last ice age. So basically you've got Canada completely glaciated, covered in ice, and there's a period of time, and so because this is an ice age, the sea levels are lower because the water's trapped in ice. And there's a period of time where there's a warming period where between two glaciers, an ice corridor opens up, and the glaciers recede enough that there's this valley, there's this corridor where humans could travel between the two glaciated sides of Canada and down into the Americas, right? So they cross this land bridge, which is now underwater because the ice age melted. So they cross over this land bridge from Siberia, pass through this ice-free corridor down into the Americas, and in 1,000 years, they've gone all the way to the tip of South America, and they've populated the Americas. So why would this be the standard narrative? Well, because all of the natives, all the way down to the tip of South America, have the DNA of the Siberian natives. So it's like the DNA tells that story pretty clearly.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there's no room in that story for Jerusalem DNA, Middle Eastern DNA.
Or Jewish
DNA.
Yeah, which sounds absurd to say it, but yeah, now you're starting to get into the clusterfuck of all this and why the church is changing its narrative.
Yeah.
It went from Lehi and family arrived to an empty continent that was preserved by the power of God.
Mm-hmm.
To raise, righteous seed or whatever, to, well, maybe the land in this remote part of America that was already populated,
mm-hmm.
and so the DNA got intermingled.
With the other natives that were there who had the Siberian DNA.
It's just like this different narrative than the one that I grew up with.
Right.
So.
And all I'm saying is, like, there would be the signature. There would be a trace in some natives.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not all the natives. Like, even if what they're saying, even if they change the narrative, okay, that's a hypothesis. Show me one native that's got that DNA, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, build the case and show it. Just like how you try to build the archaeological case for Mormonism. And, for 17 years, the BYU archaeologists work on this.
Exactly.
They can't find it. So this is just, to me, the most egregious, obvious thing where it's like, we don't have any DNA from Jerusalem, from the Middle East, in Native Americans, and these are supposed to be the principal descendants of the Lamanites. Now, even if they're among, right? But to me, that's I think I don't know how you can just brush that one by. So, like, if that was the only thing we talked about today, and we didn't go into any of the other things, which we got a lot more, but if that's all we talked about, like, that's until you can build a case. And until you, like, the burden of proof now stands on Mormons to prove, to give any sort of evidence whatsoever. But if you're in a paradigm where your hypothesis is false, well, you're not going to find any evidence because the fucking hypothesis is false. Like, you move to a new hypothesis. That's what you do.
Yeah,
that's what you do.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving the goalpost in Mormonism. It's a mess. Like, the situation that the church is in today is they're realizing that the fundamental product is really defective, and they don't know what to do. They don't know how to fix it, And the Community of Christ, which used to be the RLDS Church, they went
which
through this.
Remind me, did they kind of split off on like an Emma Smith sort of trajectory? Like, how did that?
No, like Emma Smith worked with one of their children, Joseph Smith, I think the third or whatever, in establishing that church.
Okay, gotcha.
But I think it was like in the 1860s,
mm-hmm.
and it was out in the Midwest.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, that church. What happened was there was a crossroads in the 1960s where they had what they called a new Mormon history. And it was just, they were starting to discover all of these new information and new data points. So the RLDS Church just went the route of more transparency and honesty.
Okay.
And so they made changes in the 70s and 80s, and they lost a lot of their membership.
I see.
And so but we doubled down. We started hiding shit. We shut down this department, and like we were not gonna go that route. So it's just really interesting, the two different roads that these two religions were at similar points, starting points in the 60s. So
right. Is there anything about DNA that you feel like I left out that's important?
No, I think that about covers it. I mean, it's complicated, but it's not complicated. The main point is that DNA is solid. We use it as evidence to condemn people to death.
Sure.
And it's not in dispute.
Right.
And the data, that the DNA data that we've gotten, the story that has emerged, is enough to make this multi-billion-dollar religion
Right.
go, oh shit. But okay, guys, they're not the principal ancestors. They're among the it wasn't an empty continent. Maybe
we
they
use some softer language.
Yeah.
Because principal ancestors is pretty clear.
Yeah.
Principal ancestors is pretty clear. It's like, okay, so the Lamanites came from part of the family of Lehi, namely Laman and Lemuel, right? Yeah. They're sort of the outcasts of the family, the wicked ones. Which, by the way, like all natives are just like wicked, right? like anyone who's not white obviously came from somebody who was cursed in some way. Like Laman and Lemuel were cursed, and then Cain was cursed, so the blacks, African Americans, are cursed. Yeah,
but they try to tell us that the Book of Mormon is not a racist book.
Yeah, of course not.
But I mean, come on, right? The darkening of the skins and just the plot, like what you just mentioned.
It's like, so how come Nephi's skin was white and not darker?
Yeah, exactly. So it's just this big mess, you know.
Okay, so try to spur this along a little bit. So anachronisms. So there's various animals, plants, metals, things that just don't show up in the archaeological record until after European contact.
Anachronisms is a huge smoking gun.
Like, I agree.
It just shuts down the whole debate. You know, like when you when you have a story that's centered around this picture of Abraham Lincoln holding an iPhone, you can clearly see that it's just bullshit. Like, there were no iPhones during Abraham Lincoln's time.
Right.
So that picture is fake.
It's Photoshop. Or it's been artificially
like
created.
It's an anachronism. Like game over. Right. Like, you know what I mean? So so there are serious anachronisms, and you even have apologists acknowledging that there are anachronisms.
Yeah, and anybody who's trying to be somewhat like not completely just burying their heads in the sand, like anybody who's trying to have an articulate conversation and defend Mormonism has to acknowledge, like, yeah, you're right. You know, it seems like there's some stuff, there's a problem, right? Mm-hmm. There's anachronistic stuff. So, I mean, there's an exhaustive list of this in the CES letter, which anybody listening who wants a deeper dive into what we're talking about, CES letter, I think you've done a masterful job articulating this whole argument, so it's very well done. Anachronisms like wheat, different metals, steel, obviously, horses, like horses. Spanish brought horses over. In fact, it's so crazy because like people think of like Native Americans, like the Sioux, like the Plains Indians who or like the Apache Indians who were like famously like terrifyingly good warriors on horseback, as being like, oh yeah, must have been horses in the Americas. It's like, actually the Spanish brought the horses, and in like 100-year period, the Indians or the natives got so good with them that they were like terrifying to fight on horseback. But they didn't have horses before that, and they were actually, there's this book, this interesting book called Empire of the Summer Moon, about the whole Comanche and Apache like Indian tribes and the whole narrative or the whole story behind that, the history behind that. And it's interesting because they were kind of like at the bottom of the totem pole. These Comanches were at the bottom of the totem pole in the Plains Indian sort of pecking order, and then they got access to horses and they became unstoppable. So, and to the point where like it stopped westward expansion in Texas. Like the people couldn't expand out because horses were, I mean, they had such a hard time fighting these natives. Anyways, it's a common knowledge. This isn't controversial to say Europeans brought horses to the Americas. So, that's just one out of dozens of things that, like we were saying, if you have the truth, then you should be able to go and find the proof. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Where's the horses?
Yeah, there's like a book called Guns, Germs, and Steel, I believe it is.
Yeah, Jared Diamond.
Yeah.
It's a great book.
This technology, like guns and steel, it just changes civilizations.
It makes so that you can colonialize anyone you want.
Exactly.
As a European nation, you can go conquer the world. That's what we did.
So this idea that this group, the Book of Mormon civilization in America has had chariots and all that kind of stuff. I mean, we're not seeing the type of civilization that you would expect to see if they really did have chariots.
No, what you see are like the mound building cultures, and you're seeing the Clovis culture further back, but it's like stone tools, and then mound builders. I mean, it's not to say that they were completely primitive, because they actually Graham Hancock has an interesting book, America Before, and he goes into exactly that. Like, well, what was here before European contact, right? It's a really great book. That's a great question. Like, let's go into that, like, curious, like, what actually was here? Because we seem to have amnesia about what was here. How can you honestly go and seek the truth of, like, well, what was here before, when you're grasping onto this narrative that, like, that Joseph Smith is perpetuating through the Book of Mormon? You're not even going to ask the question because you already know.
Mm-hmm.
And instead, what you're going to do is you're going to try to, like, confirm you're going to have a confirmation bias where you're trying to confirm your view with every piece of evidence that comes up. You're going to say, this mound here, Serpent Mound, I must prove that the natives lived in America.
Yeah.
Or that the Book of Mormon civilization lived in the Americas, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a fascinating subject. Even, like, Mormon apologists are divided. You got people, I think his name is Rodney Meldum or something like that. Like, there's, like, what they call the Heartland Book of Mormon model, and then there's, like, apologists that argue more of the landing was more in South America.
Mm-hmm.
So so
that they can kind of piggyback on, like, the Mayan Empire or something.
Yeah, like, there's. And to help alleviate the DNA problem.
Okay.
So even the apologists are divided on what kind of civilization and the locations that they're defending.
Yeah, and I don't mean to say that, like, there's not some mysteries and some really fascinating stuff about, like Graham Hancock's work is really fascinating to me about, like, well, what was here before? And maybe there was proof of lost civilization, but it definitely didn't come from Lehi's family.
Yeah, exactly.
You see what I mean? Like, that much is pretty clear. But let's go on. I mean, it feels weird to just, like, move on because there's, like, anachronisms or, like you said, such a smoking gun.
Yeah, like, each one of these subjects is fascinating in of themselves, and you can go really deep on each one of them.
Mm-hmm.
But I think one of the powers of the CES letter is I kind of take a step back and put you on the cliff to look at the whole forest.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And you look at the whole forest and you're just like, shit, is this really God's forest here?
Right.
I mean...
And we're trying to bottle all this up into one podcast for you. So, all right, so let's move it on. Archaeology, or the lack thereof, showing any evidence whatsoever of a civilization mentioned in the Book of Mormon. Hundreds of thousands fallen in battle, but not a single tooth has ever been recovered. Not a single breastplate, which they supposedly had steel, right? Not a single sword, not a single spearhead. Where was Zarahemla?
Yeah.
It's cities
like,
of hundreds of thousands of people.
Like, there's even some, like, it's just, it's so absurd that they're even talking about, like, two Comoras, one in New York and one in South America. Like, the idea that all these soldiers died in the Hill Cumorah in New York. I mean, there's no archaeological
It's a clean
evidence.
hill, right?
There's no... I mean, when you go to the old world, like Rome and all that, you find all of these archaeological evidences to show that the Roman Empire really did
Which
exist.
is contemporaneous, if the fall of Zarahemla or the fall of the Book of Mormon civilization is 500 AD, 400 AD.
Yeah, 400.
That's Rome.
Yeah, exactly.
We have fucking Rome still. We
We're
have
still
the
using-
city still.
Yeah, we're still using their sewer system.
Yeah, exactly.
The waterways and stuff.
Yeah, it's bizarre. So, I mean, I can see, like, so let's try to still man the argument, because it'd be better if we had an apologist here and we could,
Yeah,
go
like
through ways with it,
I have a lot of, like, if you go to my website, you can see
yeah,
a
you've
lot
done
of
a great job.
So I think that is more powerful, like having it in written form.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they say this, I say this, as opposed to a conversation and people kind of have to dig through and all that.
Yeah.
And in the written form on the website, there's, like, links. You can
Yeah.
click on this link to see that what I'm saying.
It goes
can be
deep.
verified.
I tried to go through all of your, the back and forth between you and all the apologists, or John Bennett and who's the guy from, what is it, Tits? What's the
the tits.
what's his name?
Kwaku, some of those guys.
I couldn't make it through all of it just because there's so much. Like, there's a lot of content. But I'm interested. Like, what's the apologist sort of like? What would they say about the lack of archaeology? I mean, that it's actually there in South America, and that's actually where it happened.
Just give it more time. We'll maybe eventually find more stuff.
Okay. Maybe the teeth will start falling out of the sky.
Yeah, well, maybe, like there's just, like the Mayan civilization wasn't discovered until fairly recently, like in the 1800s or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Like, just give it more time, and we'll maybe discover more stuff to verify the Book of Mormon.
Right. But I remember reading there was a LDS archaeologist who surveyed Cumorah in New York, right? And basically said completely clean hill.
Yeah, I think what happened was somebody wrote to the church headquarters, and a letter from the First Presidency through their secretary basically stated that, like, it's we don't believe that there was any, like, we're not doing archaeology on the Hill Cumorah. Like, there's just LDS archaeologists that are just not interested in the hill. Like,
yeah, of course.
We're not acting as if you would expect us to act if we really believed it.
As if there was like some sort of chamber full of all of the lost relics of the ancient civilization that's been lost to time.
Yeah, like, it's just really funny. Like, we talk about it, but we don't act like it really happened.
Yeah, because there's supposed to be like a magic compass. What's it called? The
Liahona.
Liahona. There's supposed to be, like floor to ceiling full of epic shit.
That's some of the stuff that Brigham Young talked about as well. So.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just really interesting. Like, to me, I'm going to repeat myself. Like, we're saying all these crazy things about the hill, but we're not acting like it really happened.
Yeah, and there were BYU archaeologists commissioned to finding evidence to try to find evidence for the Book of Mormon, and they didn't after 17 years of searching.
Yeah, they gave up on that. I think they disbanded that department. I'm not sure, but
they're like, hey, let's use modern technology and science to just settle this once and for all. We'll just show people that it happened. 17 years later, like, okay, we'll whisper, kind of like shuffle this one away.
Yeah, so like that quote that you shared with us in the beginning from Clark, if we have the truth, that was said in the 50s, and this whole archaeology, where they were making an adventure to go find evidence and stuff, that was in the 50s and 60s. We had a lot of bravado or
transparency, and we have it.
Yeah, we had a lot of like arrogance back then.
Sure.
Oh, we got the truth. What are we afraid of? Let's use science. Let's get to the bottom of this and have more proof for our religion. But then shit started happening. We're not finding anything. Oh shit! They found the papyri for the Book of Abraham in the 60s.
Yeah, which we're gonna get into.
Yeah. Oh shit! Joseph Smith was married to all these women, like, and we have all these affidavits and stuff like that. So all this, like, they started out in the 50s and 60s, like, yeah, we're just gonna go for it, But then when the stuff started popping up in the 60s, there's a history too back in the 1910s and 20s. But in the 50s, they just had they just had this renewed courage to say, "Oh, we can find evidence." But I think what happened was the 60s and 70s really put a wet blanket on that pursuit. So.
Changed the whole kind of outlook on like going out and trying to find it.
Yeah, and then you started seeing more of the shutdown in the early 80s and 90s.
See, I grew up in a place where nobody was actively trying to go out and find any sort of... Nobody was even going out to preach. Yeah, so our missionary program's a little bit... well, I don't know why it's called a missionary program, because it's not that. It's not missionaries. It's not like going out to spread the word. Yeah. It's just service. It's just like giving community service.
So that goes back, that kind of relates to what I was saying before. Like, we're saying all this stuff about Hill Cumorah, but we're not acting like...
Right.
So it's like if you guys really believe that you have the truth and all that, you would do everything you can to spread the gospel.
Yeah, you have to. In fact, that's what most of the pages are about. And it's like we spread it to all corners of the earth.
But you're stuck in southern Utah.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so translation errors. This is a big one. Translation errors and wording unique to the 1769 King James Bible that Joseph Smith actually possessed are in the first edition of the Book of Mormon.
Yeah, like they're still in there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like the italics are in the areas they're related to the King James 1611 translation.
Mm-hmm.
So these are like specific areas that are related to the translators in that time frame, which is way after the Book of Mormon was supposedly.
Right. So just to put that into perspective, you've got, all right, sometime around like 400, 500 AD, you've got the last sort of stand of the Nephites or whatever, right? So you have Moroni.
Yeah, like Moroni and Mormon,
Uh-huh.
Mormon, they both were working together to abridge the gold plates and to make it presentable for Joseph Smith.
So Mormon starts the record.
Yeah.
Right. And then Moroni kind of finishes it and preserves it in the hill.
Yeah, like there's like abridgment going on and just some cleanup work and on the gold plates and all that. So,
sure. So you've got like you've got this artifact that may or may not have ever existed being preserved of this historic history, right, of this past. But and it's because it's this divine text, it's got revelation in there from other prophets from the from the Bible, right? So in other words, there's tons of like Isaiah and these prophets that are coming through in the Book of Mormon, which is, at the time was probably a huge argument for why it's valid, right? Because people that Joseph Smith is kind of pitching this to are Bible-fearing, God-fearing, like Bible-reading people. And so they're going to recognize that language. They're going to recognize that this is, Isaiah, or they're going to at least resonate with the fact that like this is the same. It feels the same as what we're already used to. Right?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Have you heard of I'm going to butcher this up, but it's like Deutero, Isaiah Deutero. It's basically biblical scholars agree that Isaiah may not have existed, or the time frame is way off. So it's just completely way off than what we say it happened when it happened, when like that Lehi and his family got the brass plates before they left Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. Well, what this is saying is Isaiah's stuff didn't even exist at that time.
Right.
So, and that's biblical scholarship. That's
separate from Mormonism.
That's widely accepted within Christianity. So,
right.
So,
well,
that's an example of like modern like scholarship and science putting a wrench in this whole
narrative.
Yeah.
But before we lose that point's important about this translation errors is like, this is a text that's supposed to have been at least, 1,500 years or so older than Joseph Smith. I mean, like, 1,500 years was before Joseph Smith is writing the Book of Mormon, is when supposedly Moroni has buried it, right?
Yeah.
So why in the fuck would the translation errors that are unique to a text written in the 1600s, right? A King James version of the Bible, 1611 version, you said, that some scholars put in their own wording. There was some errors, some translation problems, et cetera, that were all amended or corrected or changed in subsequent editions, right? So this isn't like this is the super compelling, damning evidence. It's like you've got unique translation problems with these passages of the Bible that show up in the Book of Mormon, and coincidentally, Joseph Smith had that exact edition of the Bible in his possession. So, I mean, Occam's razor would suggest, well, he just copied word for word out of his Bible.
Yeah, like you can't. It's obvious that he had access to the source because these are very specific italics.
Yeah.
The italics are words that these 1611, like these 17th century translators used to make the text more readable or more understandable.
So they wouldn't have been in Moroni's version.
Right, exactly.
They wouldn't have been in the passages that Moroni had written down. So I've always kind of struggled to understand that. So is the narrative, the LDS, like kind of Orthodox narrative, that Moroni had, like, so when somebody reads a Bible passage that's in the Book of Mormon, it's supposedly that, there's like a heritage from the same source, right? Like it's coming from the same source. It's not claiming someone else said it. It's saying like Lehi carried the source across the ocean.
Yeah, there's that, but like the narrative is that the Bible has been corrupted over the centuries, especially by these translators.
Gotcha.
The Book of Mormon
It's
hasn't been contaminated or corrupted because it came directly.
Except for the first edition.
Exactly. Like it's supposed to be the truer version.
Yeah,
so
but
like
the first
Isaiah
edition
stuff in the
has...
Book of Mormon is the truer
Gotcha.
words of Isaiah than the Bible stuff.
And Lehi would have brought those words across the ocean because
Yeah.
Isaiah existed not... Supposedly, Isaiah was in like Jerusalem, like in the Middle East, not in the Americas. So that's, I guess, clearing up my confusion. So the Bible passages showing up in the Book of Mormon are a legacy that Lehi supposedly passed down, and it's like the legacy of this whole civilization down to Moroni.
Yeah.
Okay. So these translation errors that happened, I mean, if Moroni existed, this would have been 1,500 years later, or 1,200 years later, or whatever it is, that these translation errors specific to Joseph Smith's Bible would have actually been written down. So why are they showing up in the first edition of the Book of Mormon? Well, because he copied the Bible. Like, that's pretty much the only way they could have shown up. It's actually impossible for them to be a coincidence.
Yeah. Yeah. And
unless God's testing your faith, and he had Moroni write the errors in there.
Yeah. So there's...
And then why would the church change them? Because they're not in the Book of Mormon anymore, right?
Right. Yeah. Now you're starting to see, like... And there's been some reason. So, piggybacking on this, there's other stuff like the inspired translation of the Bible, like Joseph Smith's translation of the Bible.
Right. Yeah.
There's been some recent research in recent years, like the Adams Chloric commentary has been demonstrated to have been the source for these translation of the inspired translation of the Bible.
So he had a source for that as well.
Yeah, like it was just like it was a commentary. It was like a book.
I gotcha.
And it was heavily influenced for that. You can Google that. Like just Google Adams Chloric commentary, Joseph Smith translation of the Bible.
Right.
And you'll see some of the information, but there's stuff like that has showed up in recent years. Like, again, we're going back to how scholarship and science is just fucking up the narrative of the church. So.
It's a bummer. It really is. It's uncomfortable. It's a bummer to have that rug ripped out from under you. Like, and I have
it's disorienting.
Dude, I have total empathy for people who,
exactly.
I mean, maybe they're listening right now. Like, what am I listening to? What is this shit? You know, This is painful. And it is. I remember the first time I hadn't even read the letter yet. I had my friend Greg. Shout out to Greg if he's listening. Really appreciate this. Actually, he approached me about this. We were drinking. I was kind of drunk, but we were at a cabin in Bryan Head, and he approached me about this whole thing. And he's like, "Dude, there's some problems, and you need to read this." And starts telling me some of the stuff. And before he could even articulate the argument or anything, I was so walls up, emotional, yelling at the top of my lungs, defending Joseph Smith.
Wow.
Just like. It was impulsive. It was reactionary. It was like, this is what I've been bred and born to do. I'm a warrior for this. You know what I mean? Like, I'm a soldier in the war for Jesus or whatever, the army of Jesus. So it's like, it's tough to maybe eventually, soften up and then receive the information and then wrap your head around it and then be like, oh, fuck. Because I thought this was the most inspired text on earth.
Yeah. I
thought this version of the Bible was inspired. I thought this Book of Mormon was like revelation. So it's really hard. It's actually devastating in lots of ways to have that rug ripped out from under you. And that's why my mom's, texting me the way she is, right? Because she doesn't want to see youth, and specifically, but anybody, have their, worldview challenged or, and she sees that as destruction. So this is a bit of a tangent, but like, what's a forest fire?
Yeah.
A forest fire burns the old and gives way for the new. So in a way, yeah, you can call it destruction. You can also call it the life cycle of the forest because it has to. It has to do that in order for the life to continue.
It's just a cycle of life. Like older generations sometimes have to pass away for new things to come.
That's how we become the species that's the most adaptive on Earth, is because we have this sort of built-in neuroplasticity and ability to adapt and ability to fit whatever niche we start out in. So a new human being could multi-purpose to anything.
Yeah.
And you put them into Mormonism and they're going to adapt to that worldview as much as they can, because they need to belong to a tribe. They need to, they need to fit into a society. And so before you know it, you're reciting the articles of faith, and you're a proponent. And like they say, like, you bear your testimony. That's how you get your testimony. You start bearing it, right?
Yeah. or you're chanting, well, this is in the LDS tradition, but I don't know if it's for yours, but like we sing Follow the Prophet. Do you guys have the hymn? Or?
I don't know about that hymn, but we've definitely used a bunch of other LDS hymns, like Onward Christian Soldiers and all the rest.
Yeah. So yeah, we have one. It's Follow the Prophet, and it's just you don't really think about it when you're in, but when you're out, you're like, wow, that's really a culty song. So.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna try to. I feel like I don't know. Maybe there's some people listening who want more. Like maybe they're like, I'm not convinced. So we'll just keep going for a little bit. There's more. There's a bunch more. Okay, so in the aside of the translation errors, which to me are smoking gun, right? There are changes to the sort of Trinitarian view of God in the Book of Mormon.
Yeah, so there's like a Trinitarian, and there still is. There are verses in there that portray a Trinitarian version of the Godhead.
And what do you mean by Trinitarian?
So it's like 3 in 1. Like they're not like in Mormonism. What even still today is how they try to separate themselves from other Christian faiths is that they believe that the Godhead is a literal, physical. Except for the Holy Ghost, but they're separate beings.
Father and the Son, like two beings in the sacred grove.
Yeah, like they're just separate beings.
Yeah.
Whereas the Trinitarian is more, they're just entwined into one. It's just a really, really weird.
It's a little bit more esoteric or abstract or metaphorical.
Yeah, and sometimes they try to make sense of it by comparing it to like solid, gas, and water, but they're all.
There really is a cool. The Trinity, I think, actually is kind of a cool model. I mean, not necessarily as like interpreting like literally, using it as like a literal interpretation of like what I'm getting at is when you go into using the Trinity as like a model for sort of understanding things, like for example, being, doing, becoming. Mm-hmm. Like that's a cool Trinity. And you can kind of sort of use it as a model to understand things. I don't necessarily think that you need to take anything like mega literally from the Bible or anything like that, but this flip-flopped from this sort of Trinitarian, and this kind of ties into the first vision, so maybe we can cover both of these at the same time, because there's like in the first vision there's this one type of description of God, and then it changes in subsequent accounts of the first vision.
Yeah.
Right?
So what we're dealing with is what we're dealing with is when the stories were told, but they were told at different times and they were incorporated at different times. So the narrative of the first vision that we have today that missionaries teach didn't evolve and didn't become perfected until much later.
Right.
And you can especially see this when you compare this narrative to Joseph Smith's 1832 journal account, where he outlines what happened in that.
And that's his first written account.
First account.
And it's written in his own hand.
In his own handwriting.
So it's 1832, but the vision happened how many years before that?
It's claimed that it happened in 1820.
So 12 years later, he actually wrote about it.
Yeah.
He didn't write anything down about it for some reason. For
and
12 years.
there's no real record in that time.
But he was writing tons. Like, he's a writer. He wrote the Book of Mormon. You know what I mean? Like,
well, he did it through a scribe.
Sure.
Yeah, like Martin Harris and Emma were involved, and then later Oliver Cowdery. But one of the narratives in the church is that he was just a dumb farm boy who couldn't write.
Yeah, so it's inspiring. It's like a miracle.
Well, yeah, that's probably like the secret sauce that the church has held on to for so long.
Because he's an ignorant farm boy.
He's just a dumb farm boy. How could this have happened? Look at the miracle that this happened. But again, remember the theme of our conversation today: scholarship and science is fucking things up. Well, one of the scholarships that's arisen over the last couple of years is that there was a college called Dartmouth College, Guess who went there?
Joseph Smith?
Hiram Smith.
Hiram Smith.
He was educated, and they had a relative that went there. His name was Johnny Smith. And he taught theology that is very similar to Mormon theology.
Right.
The 3 degrees of heaven.
Interesting.
The eternal nature.
Yeah, you can sort of
spirits.
start to dissect like what went into Joseph Smith's worldview.
Yeah.
And all these different, like the next thing on the list is actually all of these other materials that you can kind of that have parallels to the Book of Mormon.
Yeah. So one of the nagging questions that bother a lot of ex-Mormons when they leave is like, the Book of Abraham bullshit, and Joseph Smith was disgusting with how he did polygamy and polyandry and yada yada yada, but they've been programmed from birth to believe that the Book of Mormon is special.
Right.
That it just can't be written without some divine supernatural power getting involved in it. And the other narrative that they can't get over is, how could Joseph Smith have written this book? He was just a dumb farm boy.
Right.
Well, that's just the box that we were programmed to be in.
Of course.
And
it comes with propaganda and imagery and a young boy and looking at golden plates and these types of images that reinforce that message. It's propaganda for sure.
So we're only presented with these very little options, and so a lot of times the church and apologists are like, well, show me how Joseph Smith could have written this, and then they'll consider the idea that the Book of Mormon is bullshit. Well, let's take a step back here and expand it a little bit. How come we're not talking about Hiram Smith? Where did he go to college? Who did he learn theology about in languages from? Johnny Smith. Let's talk about treasure hunting, and how that relates to the 19th century, 18th century practice of stealing bodies, like grave robbing.
Really?
That's a whole fascinating...
it feels like you need like a historian level deep dive into painting the canvas of putting it in context. It needs to be told in context. That's the problem, right?
Yeah.
It's like if you understand more of... dude, what would be fascinating? We need to get Dan Carlin, Hardcore History. We should get him to do a fucking 5-hour podcast deep dive into the roots of Mormonism. He'd be the best guy for that. But understanding the context in which the story begins and unfolds.
Yeah, and I talk about this on a page on my site. It's the Book of Mormon translation page in response to Jim Bennett. But there's a whole fascinating thing, but there's more to the story, and it's not just Joseph Smith creating the Book of Mormon. You got to...
Of course, you got Oliver Cowdery involved,
exactly.
you said Martin Harris involved, and a bunch of other people.
But when you start to realize, look at Hiram Smith and Joseph Smith, they were two peas in a pod.
They died together.
So that kind of relationship is not... Joseph Smith was not in a vacuum. He was educated by his brother Hiram, who was Dartmouth.
Yes, and you've got other people who are also sharing at the top of the power hierarchy with Joseph. Yeah. So that they're just as invested into the whole thing as he is.
Yeah, and to the 21st century observer, all this folk magic and treasure hunting and stuff is just really confusing, and it's just really WTF. But what happened, I just mentioned grave robbing a couple minutes ago. So medical schools in the in the 1700s and the 1800s, they had a major problem. They couldn't get bodies to teach medical students the anatomy, human anatomy, because the cultural perception of the body was it's sacred. When we pass on, it needs to be buried and it needs to be untouched. Just leave it alone so that they can move on in the afterlife. So there was an underground criminal enterprise going on where these medical schools would reach out to these grave robbers to steal these bodies. And one of the methods that they usually did was they would have barrels that they would fold the bodies and put it in the barrels and put whiskey in it to mask the odor.
No shit.
And they would transport the bodies to the medical schools in that method. Well, Joseph Smith Sr. was one of the trades in the Smith family was bells. When Joseph Smith Sr. was put into debtor's prison, one of the things that he did while he was in prison was he would make bells. So there's a lot of history between, like with Dartmouth College. There was a individual by the name of Nathan Smith. I don't know if you ever heard the story. This is big in the LDS Church, but when Joseph Smith was a child, he had a leg problem.
Yeah, I've heard that.
And they did surgery on his leg.
Yeah, and he refused the painkiller.
Yeah.
He refused to drink or whatever.
Well, the guy who did that was Dr. Nathan Smith.
Mm-hmm.
He worked at Dartmouth College.
Interesting.
And the mother, Lucy Smith, she wrote a biography later after Joseph and Hiram were killed. And she had trouble remembering the name of a doctor that operated on the leg. The guy's fucking name was Nathan Smith. The same last name as you, sweetheart. So,
right.
But there's a reason why, is that Nathan Smith got caught smuggling bodies into the medical school. It was a scandal. So there's like a whole story, like Brigham Young and Lucy Smith had like they didn't like each other, and he wanted to ban her books and all that because the minute she mentions Nathan Smith,
she's kind of linking Joseph Smith to
it. Like it ruins Mormonism because it links to Dartmouth and the whole dumb farm boy
that whole narrative
falls
goes
apart.
Away, yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah, so that's,
obviously he's more. Here's the thing, like another way to approach that is to just say simply, like, use a little bit of logic and be like, okay, how could it have been written by a dumb farm boy? Well, another hypothesis is that he wasn't a dumb farm boy.
Yeah,
that he's actually a pretty articulate con man.
Yeah, and so in that framework that I just outlined, Dartmouth and all that, the narrative with that is that it was a family enterprise.
Right.
And they were writing the Book of Mormon as a Masonic book.
Interesting.
They were copying another individual that made a lot of money doing Masonic books.
And he try to sell the licensing to the Book of Mormon later.
So
it was
Canada.
Kind of like a money first sort of project, like a capital venture.
Exactly. And before in the first page of the Book of Mormon, before it was written as translated by Joseph Smith, it was Joseph Smith, author and proprietor.
Right.
So,
because he wanted the rights, proprietor.
Exactly. Yeah. So
Damn.
It was a family enterprise, and so the way that Joseph Smith fits in this narrative is that he was charismatic. He was the actor on the stage. So his job was to be the magic,
the face of it. Yeah,
the actor. So he put on a show for Martin Harris with the Rock and the Hat thing. That's where the Rock and the Hat thing. It wasn't an actual Joseph Smith was getting information from a rock.
Of course.
It was just a shit show for Martin Harris, so Martin Harris believed it. It was a shit show for Emma Smith. It was a shit show for...
When you say this kind of stuff, it's like, of course. Yeah, of course. But then I drove past like 5 fucking temples.
Yeah, exactly.
Like huge architecture. Like
there's been a lot of them that propped up. And
yeah, they've been popping up all over. Like they're putting another one in St. George.
We need more temples in Utah.
Yeah. We got to do more of these like secret handshakes and shit in the temple. Like there's a lot of need for it apparently. It's crazy though. All I'm saying is like it's like of course, but this is just still a thing. Like a lot of energy behind it, a lot of fiscal energy behind it, a lot of financial capacity to the church right now, which we can talk about later.
Yeah, that's just the power of Mormonism. The power of Mormonism is it's not just a theology. They tie family into this.
Of course.
You want to see your daughter get married in temple? That's great. But why don't you go ahead and write the check that you owe for tithing, $20,000, and then we'll give you the temple recommend so you can go watch your daughter get married.
Oof.
So it's that control. Like the last thing you want is to miss your daughter's wedding and to be like that apostate or that inactive guy in front of your whole family. Okay, here's the check.
Yeah, and there's a whole, and you're in Utah, so everybody's in on it, which means like you're the one dude on the outside now. If you don't show up, if you don't have the check, Joe Smith over there, he's not paying his tithing or whatever,
Yeah, so from a business perspective, the most brilliant thing that the church ever did was to tie the temple to money.
Sounds like Scientology. It's exactly. Sounds like any cult, really. Like that's exactly what you do. Warren Jeffs It's exactly what he did. He bled people completely dry. Like companies that were, I mean, there's some construction companies in Colorado City that were raking in millions of dollars during, booming years of construction in southern Utah. It's booming right now too. But like, he's just funded well because people will give it all. I mean, that's even more fervent. Like now imagine being in the presence of like the walking living prophet, like Warren Jeffs is the face, the Joseph Smith guy in the flesh, asking you for your money and your daughters and your wives if you they'll take your wives too if you don't watch out.
Yeah, the ex-Mormons joke that, well, it's not really a joke, but we say that Joseph Smith was the 19th century Warren Jeffs.
Yeah, and you have an infographic in CES Letter comparing it.
Which
is just like, if you look at it, it just looks like Joseph or Warren Jeffs sort of one-upped him in all the categories. Like he kind of did the job a little bit better. I mean, he had it's like 70 wives instead of 36 or whatever.
Very similar numbers, which is very crazy.
It is crazy. We'll get into polygamy in a bit. So as far as the materials go, so we briefly touched on the Trinitarian thing, but in a nutshell, just as a reminder, that was like, he writes this account of the vision down 12 years after it supposedly happened in his own handwriting. You get this version of the vision, which has more of a Trinitarian God.
Yeah, like it just talks about Jesus this, but there's no like clear Father and Son. And the purpose of why he went. Like,
the intention of the whole thing.
Yeah, like that was just to get just to repent of his sins in that 1832 account. But the later accounts that we talk about today as missionaries, Joseph Smith was confused. He didn't know which church was true.
Right.
So he went into prayer to find the answer to the true church.
Which makes, like you said, it's been refined. It's been kind of tidied up, the story.
Been
but
optimized.
the presence of Satan in the first vision is honestly another big missing one, right? So it's like, because he leaves that out of the first account, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, the first and only time in your life that you've ever been attacked by like the deceiver, like the ultimate evil force of the universe, Satan, right? Like you just had the devil show up, and you don't write about it, at all.
The other thing is like you're seeing the God of the universe, but you're missing details, like very important details. And
just to say that like nothing of Satan at all in his own handwritten account, and then that's just like you said, it's part of the narrative, it's part of the propaganda. It's like what you grow up believing. I remember watching these like cartoons, these animated Mormon stories, and you've got like Joseph Smith like struggling in the darkness. The darkness is around him, and it's like, oh, here's the Satan scene.
Yeah, I remember those.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So that well, actually, I mean, first of all, the fact that he took 12 years to write anything about it is weird, and nobody heard anything about it. Like, there's people who were confused that there was a first vision.
But it wasn't unusual either. There were a bunch of other people in that same area
who were having visions. Yeah, it's like painting the context. There's actually many, many contemporaries who were very, very similar to what Joseph Smith was doing.
Yeah. So it wasn't unusual.
No. He's not even that special. It's just special that it got this momentum.
Because it got killed in Carthage.
So do you think the martyrdom's the thing that really made it take off?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's interesting. Wow. It's so trippy to think that like the momentum that took it all the way to here.
If they would have left him alone, the polygamy stuff and the polyandry stuff would have likely killed off the religion.
Okay. Well, we're almost... I'm going to skip through this other stuff quickly because I want to get into that, the polygamy, polyandry stuff. But there were some contemporaneous materials that really seem like they've impacted or influenced the Book of Mormon to the point you might even suggest plagiarism, a heavy influence from a book, View of the Hebrews, the late war between the United States and Great Britain, and the first book of Napoleon. Mm-hmm. All three of those texts read very similar to the Book of Mormon, or they have a lot of parallel elements to them, right? And you break it all down in the CES letter very well.
Guess who else went to Dartmouth and was educated by Johnny Smith?
Author of
what? Author of the View of the Hebrews.
So it's like they share like a common lineage of like kind of.
Ethan Smith was involved in.
Interesting.
So I'm not. Apologists try to attack me, trying to say that I'm saying that it was direct plagiarism, like Joseph Smith was copying line by line. No, I'm saying it's the context of his environment.
So he was inspired by, right?
It was his fan fiction today.
Yeah. Captain Kidd.
Yeah. It was the environment that he was in. And so this concept of where the Native Americans came from, and that there was another civilization, a dark, filthy group, it's not unique to Mormonism.
Right.
Like it was one of the theories that that society at that time held on to try to explain the origins of the Native Americans.
Right.
Because that was a fascinating subject to them. They wanted to understand where the hell did the Native Americans come from.
Yeah, it's cool when you kind of do an autopsy on Mormonism. You start to see the influence, the epigenetic, like, and the influence of his environment, and what went into the writing of the story. And William Kidd was another one, like a big one. He kind of looked up to him as a treasure hunter, right? It seems like. And some of the locations and the maps from Kidd's, like Cumorah in Africa.
Yeah, like
Comoros, which was previously Cumorah.
Yeah, like it was. The island name changed a little bit, but it's. Guess what the capital of the island is?
What?
Moroni.
Dude, it's like a smoking gun. It's like. It's kind of
Cumorah, like there's different spelling of it, but they sound very similar. But the damn capital of the place is Moroni. Okay?
Right.
So
he's just getting inspiration from these different things that he has around.
Yeah, like so there's this TED Talk that I saw. It's called "Everything Is a Remix."
Yeah. That's a good.
So Star Wars, I mean, everything's a remix. Like
there's no original.
Yeah, exactly.
Thought. It's all kind of like you're putting your own spin on it, your own flavor on it.
Things influence each other.
Of course.
And it's the same with Joseph Smith.
And there's nothing wrong with that as long as you're like, hey, yeah, look at my cool piece of fiction.
Yeah.
You know, and then you're like, and I'm also super stoked about these other artists that I draw inspiration from and give them credit.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. Like, still like an artist. It's a cool idea.
Yeah.
It's like, other people inspire you, copy what they're doing. Nothing wrong with that. Like, I look up to a lot of podcasters, look up to a lot of thinkers and other, people, like, I don't want to say other visionaries because I'm not a visionary, but you know what I mean? Like, I look up to people who I see as visionary, and I try to incorporate their, like, worldview or their thoughts, what they have to offer the world, into my own life. Mm-hmm. Nothing wrong with that. It becomes a problem when you say that it's original from you or from God, and it's not fantasy or fiction, but it's the literal truth. Yeah. That's when it becomes like
it's fraud.
It's fraud, straight up fraud as fuck. Okay, so moving on to let's go into the Book of Abraham. So this is
it's a smoking gun.
Another smoking gun. See, we could have just stopped after one, but like. There's just you have to keep going because there's so many of them. So the Book of Abraham is one of the books of the Pearl of Great Price, right?
Yeah.
So and it's supposedly.
Do you guys have that, by the way?
Yeah. It's in the. I mean, we pretty much have the foreign one. We have all the I would say major Mormon stuff up until probably like the split where John Taylor, like the 1880 Revelation, 1886 thing is sort of like.
But that's what interesting. Like, the reason why I asked is, like, for example, the RLDS Church never accepted or canonized the Book of Abraham.
Really?
Yeah. So I was just curious, like, how your group embraced the Book of Abraham.
I mean, as far as I'm aware of, I grew up with the awareness that it was scripture for sure.
Interesting. Yeah. So
I mean, and in like another inspired Joseph Smith text, right?
Yeah.
Just like Doctrine and Covenants, Book of Abraham. Yeah, the whole Pearl of Great Price, I always thought was legit.
Yeah. Yeah, the Book of Abraham, it's we can get into the weeds here, but the basic high-level synopsis is that Joseph Smith wrote it not expecting us to be able to understand.
To read Egyptian.
Yeah, to read Egyptian. He underestimated.
And at the time, no
Stone.
one could read Egyptian.
Yeah, like he didn't know about the Rosetta Stone.
Right.
Which showed up 10 years before he started the Book of Abraham.
So he just didn't have any awareness of it.
He didn't have any.
And nobody in his part of the world was speaking or writing it. Not speaking, but writing or understanding, translating Egyptian, right?
Yeah, like information just passed slowly in those days.
Of course.
And what was going on in Europe with the Rosetta Stone just never really passed on to his neighborhood.
Right. So to give people an idea of what we're talking about, the Book of Abraham comes from So I don't know who the guy, but somebody was coming through town.
A guy by the name Michael Chandler.
Michael Chandler's coming through town with this artifact,
Yeah,
this papyrus.
these mummies.
These mummies, and among them is a papyrus artifact from Egypt.
Yes.
And he's kind of like showing them off. Joseph Smith,
and by the way, that papyri is just a standard funeral text.
Yes, for sure.
Nothing special.
Joseph Smith gets his hands on this papyrus,
and he says it's from Father Abraham.
It's from Father Abraham, written in his own hand.
Exactly.
Written in his own hand. So this papyrus is from Father Abraham, written in his own hand. And by the way, nobody at the time can understand Egyptian, so nobody can be like, bullshit. But okay, now we can. Now we can translate Egyptian. So when you translate it, it's just a standard funerary text for a man named Hor, and the LDS Church, I think they pretty much concede that that's what it is.
No, they conceded it.
Yeah, they're like, yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah.
So do they do that in the sense that like, yeah, that's what it is, and he was fraudulent about it, or do they do it in the sense of like he was inspired somehow by that papyrus?
Let me take a step back. When I say they concede it, they concede that it's a standard funerary text.
Sure.
They concede what the Egyptologists are saying about it.
Yeah. But
where they try to wiggle out of it is by saying, well, it wasn't a translation. It was a source that they call it. It's called the catalyst theory. It was a source that created the catalyst
to give
for
him inspiration,
to receive revelation, as opposed to
so it's
translation.
It's soft language. We just like softened the edges around that whole thing, and we made it possible for it to be a catalyst for revelation instead of it being written in his own motherfucking hand.
Yeah.
From Joseph Smith. He said Abraham wrote it in his own hand. Okay. But
so there's several problems with that.
Yeah, it doesn't date this time of Abraham. It's much later.
But what do you see in the Book of Abraham? You see the facsimiles. So the facsimiles,
which are the images of the papyrus, right?
Yes. So you can tie it to the papyri. You can see, and there's another thing that's called the Kirtland papers, so the alphabet and grammar of the Egyptian language, so Gael, and on the left side of that, it has the hieroglyphics.
Right.
And then on the right side, it has these big clunk-ass paragraphs.
Right.
That would end up.
That doesn't make any sense. Yeah.
That's not how Egyptian.
No. It's like a hieroglyphic doesn't mean a paragraph.
Yeah, exactly. So we have all of this stuff to show that. It was a translation, and
he was claiming
like in his mind.
Yeah, he was saying, "Here's the alphabet. I'm translating it."
Yeah,
for sure, very clear, and we're trying to soften the language around that or whatever, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the LDS churches, the church I grew up in, as far as I'm concerned, no one's really blared the horn loud enough to say, what about the Book of Abraham, for people to actually have to come up with an argument against it. And what would actually happen would probably just be that person would be ostracized, and they'd be the heretic, they'd be the black sheep, you kind of send them away or whatever.
Yeah.
And don't let them present the argument too articulately in front of everyone else, because then other people are going to be like, wait, what? What do you mean? What do you mean it was written in Egyptian and Joseph Smith claimed to have read it and translated it into the Book of Abraham, but now we can read Egyptian and it's just a standard funerary text for a guy named Hor? What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that, Jeremy?
Yeah, exactly. Did you guys how did you guys approach the internet, by the way?
I would say, so not like Warren Jeff's group. So in Colorado City, like it was like you'll be struck down if you have a TV or the internet. So it was like a transition. It was a journey for them with all that, I'm sure. But there were definitely periods of time where they were like, you can't be on or have access to anything like that. For us, my parents were actually very cool, like for the most part. Like, I mean, they were cautious, obviously. I mean, and for good reason. I mean, you can end up with, there's a lot of people just totally helplessly addicted to porn right now, so there's like problems with society and people using things, not just like the internet for porn, but like alcohol or anything else to cope with things that they need that they're not getting, like community and belonging and meaning and purpose and all the other things that Western society hasn't really filled in for us, right? So that's, I would say cautiously, but I had access for sure. And especially when it was for like academic projects, like if it was for school, I could totally use a computer, could use the internet.
Interesting.
I didn't have my own personal computer until I was, 12, 14, somewhere in there. But I was pushing for it. Like I wanted my own computer big time. And I mainly just wanted to like fucking play video games and shit, you know. Like that was kind of why I wanted it so badly.
Yeah. And to be fair, like for example, I grew up in the mainstream LDS church, so I had access to the internet. But the reality is that back then, like I'm talking in the early 2000s, you had to know the question to ask, the question to put in Yahoo.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas nowadays, social media, like that just pops up on your feed that you didn't even know was a question
and
asked.
Search engine indexing is so much better.
Yeah.
So I mean, like just the fact that, like you're saying, social media, you write CES letter in 2013, and within months probably, it's in my awareness, you know,
Wow, crazy.
to a year max. Like it wasn't that far along because I, for sure, by 2014 was totally done with that, for sure. So it was like months.
Yeah.
And it was just because of Reddit.
Yeah.
Straight up.
Exactly. And I've had people tell me, like, I didn't even know the church's essays. To our listeners, like the church wrote several essays surrounding different topics, starting in 2012, late 2013. Race in the priesthood and Book of Abraham, Book of Mormon translation. So it's just kind of official church essays on what their responses are. But a lot of people have left the church over some of these essays.
Right.
Because it's creating a different narrative than the one that they learned in Sunday school.
Right.
So, but I've had people say, I didn't even know these essays existed until it showed up on my Facebook feed. So social media has that powerful effect of bringing things to their awareness that they didn't even know was a question to ask or something to put in the Google search box.
Right. And to bring this back into context, Joseph Smith is doing all of this fraud and con work and whatever you want to call it in an environment where there isn't this readily, we're not in the information age in the 40s, 30s. Yeah. You're not in the information age, so it makes sense. And it's commonplace for people to get caught up in cons and get caught up in these these strange
they had
sort
a magical
of
worldview
very much so
to add to that.
Yeah, exactly. So now we can kind of like pull the lenses off and like kind of see what the thing is, right? And kind of like, oh, these, this whole narrative that's kind of shaped around Mormonism that I've just kind of been siloed in a way. Now I'm not so siloed because of now the cell's more permeable, right? Like now other stuff kind of comes in and out. Like, and I just pull out my phone and maybe Sam Harris is on my phone now. Maybe Alan Watts is in my periphery now. Maybe I'm getting other perspectives, and it's not just all Mormonism. And so for the youth, for the younger people, specifically the generations growing up since like native to the internet,
they're not buying this.
How could they?
Yeah.
How could they?
And like I mentioned, so we're in this time where Brad Wilcox, who's a general authority in the LDS Church, he just did he's a counselor in the Young Men's Presidency, and he did a fireside basically talking about doubts. But his talk was very fear-based. If you leave the church, you're going to lose everything.
Right.
So, and he wasn't giving good answers. So this generation, they want real, concrete answers of substance, and they're not buying into this fear-based narrative.
Yeah, and when you grow up native to the internet, you grow up with this sort of different, probably, I mean, I was born in 92, so I mean, I grew up with the internet, but not like with an iPad in my hand from day one, right? So it's a different thing, but you grew up with a different kind of perspective towards information.
Yeah.
It's like, this is more information, you know what I mean?
Yeah, like I was baptized in 1989, and I remember, like, I remember when the internet showed up, like 94, 95, and creating my first HTML page back then. And just the excitement that was surrounding this weird thing that was popping up, this super information highway.
Yeah.
But I can remember, like, being indoctrinated in the 80s and early 90s, like, it's just your world, your family, and you just take whatever that your grandparents and your parents tell you as truth. because they're your source of authorities and all that.
Yeah.
But it's just a completely different mindset with these. Like I have a 15-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a 10-year-old. So they have access to the internet. They have their own computers. So it's just really interesting that when they're not sure about something, they Google it.
Right.
They research it.
That's baked into the digital native
like
landscape.
they're like, I'm not sure about that. I'm gonna go check it and see what Google says about it.
Yeah, and because they understand like a higher level of truth than just like your perspective.
Yeah.
I mean, you might be right, but I can also check it up against like what everyone else has sort of like said on Wikipedia.
Yeah, and the way that I parent is I have no problem showing that I'm a human being.
Right.
I have no problem saying that I make mistakes, and sometimes I have no problem saying I don't know. I think that's one of the most powerful phrase. It probably is the most powerful phrase that I can. I don't know, and I'm sorry that happened. I'll try better next time.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
By saying those two things, it's acknowledging that I am a human being.
Yeah, I mean, we're all limited by our own perspective and capacities.
And so that mentality and framework that I'm operating as a parent encourages them to go, well, that's interesting, Dad, but let me go check and see what the research says over here.
So I kind of got like two different contradictory sort of sides to this as a kid. One was, think critically. Like, that's going to be the best skill you'll ever have. You know what I mean? Like, be a critical thinker. Like, my dad taught me how to play chess, and he taught me how to, like, solve problems, And I really, that's where our relationship, that's what I value, like, for sure. Like, the hours of working on projects, of playing chess, of teaching me how to think in lots of ways, right? Like, I actually have to credit him for that. But what's interesting is, like, then you've got the blinders up around this other thing where you've got like this siloed worldview around Mormonism, and you don't want the on the value of critical thinking and curiosity and actually use your mind to come into the Mormon space and actually apply it to that. So it's kind of this weird double standard.
Some of the most intelligent humans I know are Mormons.
Right.
Some of the dumbest Mormons I know, some of the dumbest humans I know are Mormons. So, to me, it's not an intelligence thing. It's your mind is getting hijacked.
Yeah.
By a cold thing.
By a parasitic sort of ideology.
In this specific area.
It is parasitic too, because think about it, it's extracting from you. It's extractive. It's a parasite. It's extractive in the sense it's financially extracting tithing. And it's extracting your bandwidth, your capacity, your resources. It's tying you up into this thing, and serve no other God before me. Do you see that?
Yeah, it's also a luxury thing too. Sometimes people have the luxury of leaving the church. Some people don't. So sometimes people are tied to their family for financial reasons or whatever. Like rocking the boat or pissing off the parents.
Is that an option for everybody?
Yeah, it could mean that the end of your survival.
For sure. It does. It's not an option for everybody, and it's not even... I feel pretty lucky to be in a position where I feel like I've been able to make that transition happen fairly... I mean, it's rocky at times, but I feel like I've done it fairly unscathed. I didn't kill myself.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people who are doing that.
Yeah.
So that's a good thing.
Yeah, exactly.
And so part of this, hopefully, is to not just rip the Band-Aid off about Mormonism, and let's just call the spade a spade, and let's just spit it how we see it, and get in the habit of that, speaking the truth. When you see something, and you perceive it to be real, speak up. You know what I mean? Speak the truth, or at least don't tell lies, as Jordan Peterson would say.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
At least don't perpetuate the lie further. So that's part A, but part B is there's life beyond. There's actually, if you think about it, it's kind of the call to adventure. That's really what it is. It's and part of the whole hero's journey, the kind of archetypal sort of mythos of man, and that Joseph Campbell kind of articulated, is the refusal of the call. That's kind of the first step, right? You get this call to adventure, and it's sort of wants you to, this inclination to go into the beyond, into the unknown world, into like the wilderness, into the scary place, which is beyond your comfort zone, and then you refuse it. You're like, nah, that sounds rough. Like, I don't want to leave my family who all believe this. I don't want, what is my dad going to say? What is my grandfather going to think of me or whatever, right? And I have a whole community and my whole world, everything. And so what is the beyond the pale being like the boundary of your world, of your reality? What's beyond that? Well, that's the unknown. That's the underworld. That's the call to adventure. It's like taking you into that chaos. So getting being able to rip the Band-Aid off of Mormonism, it sounds, I mean, it's there's no sugarcoating it. It's going to be hard for sure. It's hard. But
there is a very difficult transitionary period, and a lot of the Mormons or religious people like to hone in on that and focus and see, look, it's gonna be miserable when you leave the church, but they don't talk about what happens after that transition.
Exactly. And another thing that sucks too is like demonizing guys like you or me, maybe perhaps, like you're just trying to rip people's faith down. You're just a destroyer of worlds.
There are people that I've told to stay in the church.
Interesting.
Because earlier in our conversation, I talked about epistemology. Mm-hmm. One of the subjects that I love and I'm fascinated by is called street epistemology. Mm-hmm. And one of the foundations of street epistemology is making sure like you have a responsibility for the safety and well-being of the person that you're working with.
Okay.
Where you're asking questions about how did they arrive to there. And sometimes there are people that you go, you're better in the church.
Yeah, like you wouldn't make the transition. Mormonism. You wouldn't make the transition.
Yeah, like you need Mormonism. God bless you.
The beautiful thing about this platform or this medium is this is just two monkeys. Like we're basically two apes that figured out, like, because of the complexity of our technology and our civilization, and we've created like an open channel through this microphone and the internet. I can open up a channel where anybody who wants to can opt in to listening to this. And
I'm hearing you through computer chips.
Yeah, through your ears. That's crazy.
That's going straight to my brain, basically.
Man, it's trippy.
Yeah,
basically, we're already cyborgs.
And the odds of all that, and what had to happen for all of it to come together.
While this rock spins and flies through infinity.
Space.
Yeah, around a 90 million mile away gas ball that's keeping it all going.
So like we don't need superstition or fables or myths to appreciate how amazing this reality is.
No, it's there. I totally 100% agree. And where we do need myths, where we do need fables or stories, I can see the value in telling stories and in instilling value in myth.
But not as literal truths that you have to pay tithing for, you know.
Right. So it's like I'm all about, Jordan Peterson telling me the meaning I can get from the story of Jonah and the well, but I don't need to believe that Jonah existed or that he got swallowed by a well.
Exactly.
Right. So, but the story can be cool. So, we're not trying to, like, this isn't an attempt to just like throw somebody down into darkness. And I think that the people who are, like you said, the apologists who are, they want to demonize people who are like giving the counter argument, the people who have left, people like you and me, who it's just like, oh, these guys, they don't have, I mean, what's their motive? Like, what's their intention?
Yeah, like, so just to give you another story, my grandfather was 85 years old. He had a book, Rough Stone Rolling, on his shelf.
I thought you were saying he wrote that. But yeah, I know about the book.
Yeah. Some people have left the church over that book. And the last thing I wanted was for my 85-year-old grandpa to have a faith crisis in his 80s. He lost his wife like 6 years before that. So I told him to just leave it alone,
Right.
I was willing to let him think that, I was willing to let him buy the church's narrative that I'm just this confused, dark, lost soul who lost his way, than to have him experience a faith crisis.
Right.
Because what is he going to do about it in his 80s when? Yeah, my dad's
like
at death's door,
Yeah, my dad's like 76, maybe almost and I think he's 76.
Yeah,
So-
like you start it gets to, like, my motive is not to get people out of the church. I don't know what's good for people. I don't live their lives. It's a very personal thing.
Very, very much so.
So sometimes the church is good for some people. Like, it helps them to stop smoking.
Well, no, there's lots of great things about the church. I mean,
Yeah,
in the
there
sense
is,
that
but
it's like in a world of, like, I mean, if you grew up in a slum in Chicago, South Chicago or something, it's like the difference between that life and growing up in Draper and having like a really safe, upbringing with community, and like there's so many things that people, I think, just opt into Mormonism because of the lifestyle, and they're like, oh yeah, I mean, this is conveniently good enough. It's good enough, right? Even though there's the weird shit, and the Book of Abraham is kind of totally a hoax, sure, but who cares? Like, life's good in the Mormon church.
Yeah, I mean, that's true, but on the other hand, you can build a life where it traps you. Like, you can be one of those guys in your late 60s and 70s and realize, shit, I spent my life into this, and I indoctrinated my kids in this.
Well, then the essence of what you're saying, and this is the number one reason why I'm not Mormon, is because speak the truth, or at least don't tell lies.
Yeah.
And if you embody that, you're kind of like, the whole Mormon story is kind of fucked. Like, you can't continue perpetuating it if you really want to speak the truth.
Yeah. So there are good things in Mormonism, but you pay a price. You pay a price for it.
Yeah, exactly. I've seen that I've seen that compromised play out intimately. I've seen that very intimately in my own life, like with the people around me, where, like, where I grew up, like where I'm from, it's very different. So, like, there's not like this. There's a culture of drinking. There's a culture of, like, wine parties and alcohol, right? And not a culture of like the LDS culture, which is like we just drink soda instead. And so, like,
you guys
we just
don't really have a word of wisdom, or
no, like, it's not just harped on the same way. And so in other words, what's harped on is polygamy. So we're all gonna, like, live polygamy for sure on that one. Like, that's the one thing we're all gonna try to do. And there's some other things like United Orders being harped on right now and some other stuff. But when it comes to, like, preach the gospel, don't drink alcohol, that kind of thing that, like, you would consider to be major, like, Mormon, it's just not there. Like people are drinking all the time, and they're not going out to preach the gospel. So it's not like LDS. It's a different flavor. And the reason I bring that up is because I've seen a lot of men, in particular, who are smart enough, and you can tell they've run into, like, their shelf is creaking, right? The shelf that they put all the shit on that they don't really know what to do with. It's creaking or about to break, and they're drinking, and they're, like, kind of turning a blind eye. Do you know what I mean? They're trying to, like, manage it because their life is, like, they have it good in lots of ways. There's some good things. Like, for a long time, I thought I was going to grow up and live, with, like, 3 wives and have a big family, because, like, that's what I've always known. And there's some goodness to that. There's something about that is kind of appealing, in the sense that, like, who wouldn't want to be surrounded with friends and family and have these, have a party with 100 people and everybody, and it's just a good time, right? Like, I can see the appeal there, but I don't want to compromise on the speak the truth part, and like actually, because then you have to, what else do you have to compromise? It goes and goes and goes. Yeah. Until you've, like, walled yourself into this prison where you have to, like, protect yourself from all the outside information or, whatever it is.
Yeah, I heard something profound that changed my perspective on things earlier in my faith crisis, or discovering the LDS Church's truth crisis, I like to say. That's better. Yeah, truth crisis. Because the onus is on them, not me.
Yeah, I don't have a faith crisis.
I'm not the problem. But I heard, so there are some people that are interested in validity. Is it true or not true? Yeah. And there are other people that are interested in utility. Yes. Is it useful? Yes. Or is it not useful?
I wonder what the distribution is on that. How many people are in it for utility?
Yeah, that would be a fascinating statistic. But
and I'll bet you it changes over, like, depending on age demographics.
Yeah,
too.
Exactly. But that really helped explain why a lot of times people overlap or talk past each other. They value different things. Yeah. So you're thinking, I was in the church because the Book of Abraham is true. Or shit, it's not true. I'm out of here. Right. They're valuing, when my daughter was in an accident, the ward came over
Yeah.
and cooked us dinner for a month
Yeah.
and mopped the floor and took care of us and gave us some money for rent or whatever.
Right. So what is neo-Mormonism in the sense that what is Utah? What is the world post-Mormon like where, hey, it's great that we value community. It's great that we want to belong to a tribe. It's great that we want to take care of the least among us.
Yeah, so that's kind of the paradox of whatever you want to call it. It's not a problem that's unique to post-Mormonism. It's, ex-Scientologists have this.
Yeah.
Ex-Jehovah's Witnesses.
Any in-group.
Yeah. So in the religious structure within Mormonism, the glue is fear.
Yes. And can I interrupt?
Yeah.
That fear starts from the very beginning, Genesis, original sin.
Mm-hmm.
And you were a lost, I don't want to use the word lost. You are a lonely, kind of isolated soul here on probation. So
you're a sinful creature.
Yeah. Trapped in a bag of skin.
Yeah.
Trapped inside of this weird sort of lustful monkey body meat suit that you're supposed to figure out how to manage, and not only manage but master. You're supposed to subdue the flesh.
Yeah.
You're supposed to subdue the lusty, passionate, kind of like nasty flesh. Yeah, you have to basically the natural man is an enemy to God.
Yes.
So you're born a fucking enemy to God.
Yes.
Okay, so that's problem one with your ideology. That's problem one with your theology,
that's why I'm not a Christian anymore.
Yeah, neither am I.
I don't like that. It's a fear-based system that is making you the problem.
Mm-hmm.
You're the one that needs to be fixed. Look at you. You're such a piece of shit that God had to bizarrely sacrifice his son.
Right.
As if we're in some Mayan.
No, yeah. So this was sort of my. Okay, so like I read CES Letter and I was like, okay, so clearly this is fucked, and just went into like, okay, maybe I'll just trade. I already was a football fan, but maybe I'll just like make that my religion, and I'll just watch football on Sundays, and I'll just like immerse myself in sports, and I'll drink, and I'll chase money, and I'll fill up the space that I just got really empty, right? Didn't really last, obviously. That's not really meaningful stuff, so it wasn't a sustainable thing, but it led me eventually to eventually you got to ask the question, you got to address like the Jesus question.
Yeah.
And this led me to
that's a whole separate
it's a different bag of worms, man. And honestly, it's deeper seated than the Joseph Smith one.
Yeah.
So that's like you got
like
that.
It ties into other religions and ancient civilizations that like how they borrowed from each other, and it's just a separate deep rabbit hole.
Yeah. And I would say the whole patriarchal sort of oppressive thing that isn't so popular anymore, or is becoming less so, that is woven into the narrative, the popular sort of Western narrative that Jesus brings as well.
Yeah, which by the way, like when you look at the Eastern religions, they don't harp on this bullshit fear-based.
Right. I shouldn't say that Jesus brings, because I don't think he necessarily brought the fear-based stuff as much as far as like New Testament, like the words of Jesus. I'm talking about more like the Old Testament, the Abrahamic faiths,
Yeah, the Abrahamic faiths.
The Abrahamic faiths are like, let's cut the dicks of all these boys and domesticate them. Literally, let's domesticate them like animals.
Yeah, like that's funny. Like I probably shouldn't say this because it invades my kids' privacy, my boys, but I didn't circumcise them, like even I thought that was.
I don't think that
was.
I don't think that should be a secret.
Shit.
I think it should just be commonplace. I think we can all say, hey, we're not going to cut little boys.
Yeah, it's just ridiculous. But yeah, it's the Abrahamic faiths that are, in my view, are fear-based, and you're the problem.
Yes.
You need to be fixed. You need to become worthy. Blah blah blah. When you look at the other, like Eastern faiths, whatever you want to call them, like Buddhism and all that, they talk about like suffering and how to alleviate it, or what's the cause of suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And, like it's not
attachment.
It's not fear-based. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that's the thing is attaching to this ego in the sense of like this whole narrative that Mormonism has about the afterlife, like if you walk the straight and narrow, if you subdue the flesh, if you do the right things, then eventually you'll be resurrected. You'll have eternal increase. Everything will be gravy. It'll be great.
Yeah.
Right. So,
and to be fair, like Mormonism is a little bit better than a lot of other religions in how they portray punishment. Like, you have a chance to fix things. Like, you're not going to go in some general hell forever. Like, you have but it's still fear based. It's still like,
it's very fear based.
Yeah,
especially if you a Mormon. Sorry to interrupt, but like if you were given the fullness of the gospel and you turn your back on it, then you're a son of perdition,
exactly,
and there's no real forgiveness.
Yeah, but you have a point there. But a lot of Mormons I talk to, at least to my face, would say that there's a very, very, very small group of people that would fit that.
Sure.
And I just don't see you being in that group.
I see.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So that's kind of how they.
I mean, according to my father, my community, they have the fullness of the gospel. Right. And so I had that laid at my feet. I was ordained all the way up to elder. And I never got married in the church or anything, but I was received the fullness. I mean, baptized and given the truth, and here I am debasing their argument. So that sounds like a heretic, at least. Son of perdition at most, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know where that spectrum. I mean, it's all fucking weird fictional terms anyways. Like, who cares? But my point is like, yes, it's very fear-based. And I would say to that point, the premise of any cult, but also specifically Mormonism in this context, is the number one thing you can never do is turn your back on this, because this is the truth, and that's baked into the cake. Yeah, from
like
a young
obedience
age.
And loyalty. Like that's where it's at. Like, if you're not obedient and loyal, you know, get out of here.
Yeah, and you see, like, you know, it's like tribalism, really.
Yeah, exactly.
It's tribalism. It's like, oh, my son's not going to be a fucking Packers fan. I'm not going to raise a goddamn Packers fan. It's like, you're a Bears fan, goddammit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's crazy. It's just like our monkey DNA.
By the way, like the sports, I'm probably going to piss off sports fans, but there's a lot of similarities there. Like, for sure. You know, there's just it's like you said, tribalism.
We just want to belong.
Yeah.
It's like, I got the right colors on, so all these people like me. It's cool. Like, I go to a Utes tailgate, and I'm all of a sudden, like, everyone's friendly. Like we're all pounding beers together. Do you know what I mean? Like, we're all part of the same team, in a way. Yeah. Even though we're not at all. Like, we're not playing the game at all. We're just, like, cheering, spectating. So, anyways, like, we could go deeper into the Book of Mormon stuff. We haven't even touched on Kinderhook plates. We haven't touched on.
Like, my thoughts is, all that stuff is it's better to like read it and see the graphics and
sure.
But I
can
think,
go deeper.
I think just having like a high level conversation on the impact of like how to move forward in a post, like what's on the other side for you, basically.
Yeah, totally.
I don't know where you want to go with this, but I think we had kind of talked about this before we started this recorded conversation, but when you're in a faith-based system, you're always worried about whether this subject or this information is aligned with the teachings or dogma of the religion, or the elders or the apostles and prophets.
Right. Like, if it's clean info or dirty.
Yeah. Like, is it? Yeah. And so, is it anti-Mormon?
Yeah.
Well, when you leave the organization, you become your own agent. So the really funny thing is, you really do have free agency when you leave it. Like, you realize,
or at least the perception.
Yeah, exactly.
Your felt sense is that you have free will, for sure.
Yeah, exactly, and that's
we don't have to get into the weeds about free will.
Yeah, but you realize that, wow, I have more choice than I did inside the religion. That I can actually take this subject and examine it on itself
Mm-hmm.
without worrying about the strings and
Mm-hmm.
and whether it aligns with the church or not.
I don't have to have all my emotion like wrapped into it.
Yeah.
You know, like my I have a lot on the line
Yeah.
at stake. So even if like you have a bias, in other words, like even if you're open to the idea of like, oh, someone presented me with this document called CES Letter, I'll check it out, right? Well, if I'm going into that setting, my setting, right? My mindset is I have a lot riding on this being true.
Yeah, exactly.
So if this really is going to debunk that this is true, then it would have to do it would have to be a bombshell, because I have so much riding on this being true that I'm just going to ignore so much shit. Like I'm gonna have cognitive dissonance, you know?
And that's why that quote is in the beginning.
Yeah.
It's saying, look, if we have the truth, it cannot be harmed by investigation. If we have not the truth, it ought to be harmed. Like that's all. That's so. Let's explore this. Again, my position is not. I don't have a position. I don't know if the church is good or bad for you, because I don't know you personally.
Right.
Only you can come to that conclusion. But
As a free agent, hopefully.
yeah. But here's the reality on the ground, and the church is even acknowledging this and getting involved in this conversation. What you think you know about the Book of Abraham that you learned in Sunday school, there's more information.
Mm-hmm.
Don't just believe me. Don't believe me at all. The church wrote an essay,
Right.
Book of Abraham. Go read it.
Right.
Go check it out.
You linked all this stuff in CES Letter.
Yeah, I put the links to the church's official essays on the fucking website.
You're using their own info to like.
Yeah, I'm just saying,
you're putting
go
it all
look
together.
at it.
You're just putting it all together.
Yeah, because we're not in La La Land here. Like these have real ramifications on your life.
For sure. And if you're
like how you raise your family and how you like what you spend your money on, and it just has real ramifications. So you just as you would spend time researching the mortgage product that you're getting involved in, or this new business venture, and looking at all the detail, you owe it to yourself to look into this religion that you're going to devote so much of your life and money and time and families and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and then when you go beyond that, right? Like if you take that line of inquiry, that line of like awareness, self-awareness, and take it further. So yeah, okay, now I've kind of dissected the ideology that I was part of. Okay, fuck. That was hard for a while, and now I can see more clearly. Mm-hmm. Thanks for that letter, by the way, Jeremy. Sweet.
Cool.
Props to you. And by the way, surprised that you're the first dude really doing something like this in 2013. You know what I mean? Like, it's surprising that there wasn't like a viral thing. I know there was earlier stuff, and I know you say you've stand on the shoulders of giants, and there's people all the way back in like the 60s.
Yeah. They're like the Tanners.
The Tanners, right.
The Mormon Think and John DeLand and all these guys.
There's lots of people, but I'm just saying, like, it's surprising that it's 2022 now, and I'm driving past like fucking new temples all the time. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but at the same time, there's Brad Wilcox firesides.
Yeah.
There's doubts. In general conference during my youth, I just never remember them talking about doubts very much.
I see.
But now it's, stay in the boat and,
right.
Doubt your doubts before you doubt your faith.
Yeah, mine's always been like that. Like where I grew up was always like that, because we were like a small little.
Yeah.
It was always just like, as soon as you stop coming to the meetings, you're gonna apostatize. So don't miss your meetings.
Exactly.
It's that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's fear based the whole time. But
like it went from that quote from that general authority in the 50s. If we have not the truth, they ought to be harmed. Blah blah blah. To doubt your doubts before you doubt in your faith.
Yeah, that's totally opposite.
Yeah, like it shows you the evolution.
Yeah.
But so it's gotten way worse over the last 5-10 years.
Right.
Way worse.
No thanks to you. Like you've definitely probably contributed to that a little bit. But where I was going with that though is like after you dissect and maybe take the lenses off, right? So
I'm sorry to interrupt real quick.
No, go ahead.
I think the pandemic has really changed.
Oh yeah, for sure, huge catalyst.
Yeah, the huge catalyst. I think we're underestimating the impact the pandemic has on doubts in leaving the church, because like a lot of the Sundays they didn't go to church because of the virus or whatever, so they got to experience that extra freedom.
Yeah.
Wow. What's this? So this is what a 2-day weekend.
And they stopped getting the constant inflow of indoctrination.
Yes, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So that has had a major impact.
I know for a fact it has, because before the pandemic, I remember getting on Reddit and checking out the ex-mo subreddit, and there was probably 70,000 subs or something. And I think now it's over 300,000.
Oh, it's a lot. I remember back in the days when it was like in the tens of thousands, maybe like 25, 30,000 or something like that.
Yeah. So
now it's just exploding.
It's exploding right now, yeah. And that's just one indicator. That's just one little gauge to measure it a little bit on one channel, one platform, Reddit, right? So it's not by any means a exhaustive, number. But so yeah, what I was going to say is like this idea of this inquiry, right? Like you owe it to yourself to put it under the microscope, right? And so John Vervaeke is a guy I would love to have a conversation with on this podcast. But
he wrote that book about the polygamous.
No, he's a professor in Canada.
I think I was confusing the author who wrote that book about about Warren Jeffs.
Probably John Krakauer.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm another guy I'm going to have on the podcast. Yeah, John Krakauer. He wrote Under the Banner of Heaven.
Yes, that's it.
And definitely going to have him on the podcast when I'm in Colorado.
Okay. Yeah. Confusing me too.
So, but John Vervaeke, he's a philosopher and professor at University of Toronto, I think. But he has this YouTube series, Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, super in-depth, 50-hour thing. But he he used this really cool metaphor in a podcast I heard him talking about, of just spectacles, lenses, right? Like you're looking through a lens and it's augmenting your perspective of the world, the way that you see the world, and it's making hopefully you see it better, right? Well, if you use that metaphor, your worldview, the ideology you're part of, the religion you're part of, everything, like Western man, like English, all of that is painting your worldview. It's the lens that you're seeing the world through. So how often do you take the lenses off and look at the actual spectacles themselves? How often do you see the worldview as a worldview versus seeing through the worldview?
Yeah.
And that is meditation. That is inquiry. That is self-observation.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the fundamental, going all the way down. If you go all the way down to eventually you're going to probably come to something like I am, which is just this. This is it. This is now. I am. And go from there. You know what I mean?
But then we can go deeper. Well, who's I?
For sure.
Yeah, when you get into the power of now stuff.
Yeah,
but who's the observer doing the observing?
That's a great question. And what does that mean? For there to be I, there must be other, right? So that's dualistic from the beginning, but that's just part of my English. So you can experience a non-dual I, right? Which would be Sam Harris's whole practice, or Advaita Vedanta, not two, non-dual. It's this idea that dualism is really just one worldview. So, and it's useful, it's useful for certain things. But to peel it way back and to even start on the path, on the journey of inquiry, of really trying to become aware, I think is the beginning of sovereignty. It's becoming more sovereign. Becoming more aware is okay, I have to see clearly before I can come into my power. I have to see clearly first. So I have to see what the fuck's going on, here and now. I am. What is this?
Yeah.
And start that inquiry process. And as you do that, you become more sovereign. As you become more autonomous. You can think for yourself. You can govern yourself.
Yeah, one of the most powerful things I got from leaving the church was I am worthy. I am enough.
Yeah.
I don't need to give away my authority and power. I contain it.
Yeah, exactly.
So I extract the authority that I gave to these prophecies and revelators.
Mm-hmm.
I took it back.
And you gave them the authority. I love that you said that.
As a Mormon.
Yeah.
Same with when I went to that kangaroo court where they tried to excommunicate me. They wanted to excommunicate me.
Oh, okay. You called it a kangaroo court?
I call it a kangaroo court because it's fucking bullshit.
Oh, okay. So it's supposed to be like a fair trial or something.
Yeah, but it's not a fair trial at all.
Gotcha.
And it's recorded. I recorded it.
You're right. I don't think I've seen it, but...
yeah. But in that meeting, I resigned from a church. So I had them outline the charges that they were claiming against me so that they couldn't say, oh, Jeremy committed adultery or whatever. I could, You
got them to state what it was?
Yeah, exactly.
Which was what, by the way?
Just apostasy,
Heresy.
Yeah, basically. And so I just said, the equivalent of, fuck you guys. Bye. And I walked out.
Nice. Drop the mic.
So I extracted my power back.
Right. Because to get kind of kicked out of the group and the club, in a way, it's kind of like if you want to be part and then you get kind of kicked out and then you just get bitter and then you're just like, well, this is why it's got all these problems.
Yeah. So that was just how I approached it. But back to my main point is like what you're saying about sovereignty. One of the key processes that you have to do that you have to go through when you leave the church is you have to peel off the onion and accept that you are enough. Mm-hmm. You are worthy. You are never the problem to begin with.
And if you need help doing that, try to find some MDMA.
Exactly. So
and hopefully a good guide.
So it's just coming to these truths that are extremely powerful in of themselves that create a empowering life,
which is what you might call experiential knowledge or gnosis. That you're enough because you feel it. You know what I mean?
But
you don't need to.
Damn church keeps telling me that I'm not worthy enough.
Right. But there's a difference between I can conceptualize this idea, I can learn it, or I can internalize it through scripture or through whatever, and then there's first person experience, knowledge. There's a knowing, or it's a different kind of wisdom. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, I would say that type of knowledge is fundamentally required. It's important. Are you familiar at all with Brian Murarescu's work and the Immortality Key?
I've heard of it, but I haven't gone deep.
I think you. It's right up your alley. But it dives further back into the religious kind of way further back into the traditions, the kind of the origins of religion and the origins of psychedelics in religion, and the Eleusinian mysteries and the kind of Dionysian wine cults, and the idea that you actually got initiated. You actually took a thing, you drank a potion, you drank a spiked wine that had ergot, which was barley. Ergot's a fungus that grows on barley. So they'd make this beer, ergotized beer, with a psychedelic fungus that Albert Hofmann used to synthesize LSD in the 50s. He used ergot. So it's they were having a initiatory experience coming into an understanding that was important, mm-hmm. And so what you're talking about is finding out that you're enough, finding out what you really are, can actually be facilitated through a experience with psychedelics.
I agree with that.
I think it's a fundamental part of actually what it means to be human. I think we co-evolved with these plants, and I think it's been part of our past. So for me personally, when I've done high doses of psychedelics, it seems like I come into a familiar territory, like a place where I'm remembering something.
Yeah.
Like a familiar map of this is actually what there is. This is actually the thing,
Yeah.
And it feels more fundamental than
Yeah.
kind of surface level.
Yeah, I love this stuff. On one of my computer monitors, I have a desktop background, and it's a monkey with there's kind of a space background, and on top of the monkey's head is mushrooms, So it's a stone ape theory, which
Terence
basically-
McKenna's theory, right?
Yeah, we're underestimating the impact that psychedelics probably had on
Human
our
cognition.
evolution.
Yeah, totally. I mean, changing us in very, very many different ways, including the rapid growth of the human brain.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, I've had a psychedelic experience years ago, and it was just it had a profound effect on my life, and time just slowed down.
And this was after you'd already left.
Yeah,
So
it was
this
after
didn't
that.
have any impact on you leaving.
No, absolutely not.
I'm sure a lot of people have had psychedelic experiences that have contributed to them leaving.
Probably,
Yeah.
but I mean, I can speak from my own experience. Like time just slowed down, and I was zeroed in on the leaves just waving against the wind.
Mm-hmm.
Just all love, all forgiveness, all like everything's just perfectly okay.
Mm-hmm.
It was just
Like
just
the deep,
really
the
profound.
deep now. Yeah, coming into the deep now, like presence.
Oh yeah, it was just I've never experienced anything like it or before or after. I don't know, dude. It was wild.
I'm glad you got that data point, because I think one of the things I'm passionate about is trying to be one of the people thinking about, or at least having the conversation around, how do we create a useful container around that experience,
Mm-hmm.
where not to say that like there should be some prohibition or some sort of war on drugs where you can't have access unless it's through like some one channel where we say it's okay or whatever. I think that people should have the sovereignty and the freedom to choose for themselves, but whether it's recreational or not. But I think that there is something to be said about like what you do with the experience itself. Like what container do you kind of create around that to make it positive, to make it like useful for your society? Like what kind of society would you have? So for example, you can use something like what are our current rites of passage, our drug experience rites of passage now? Well, maybe like the first time you get to drink wine with your parents at dinner, or maybe you drink some coffee, as a kid, and you're like, you've been waiting for this first time your parents let you drink coffee. Or really maybe it's just like your first, time you vomit and black out in college, and that's like a rite of passage. Just like, oh dude, I got so fucked up last night, I don't remember anything, and I puked all over myself. It's like a rite of passage in a way.
and it's not. I'm not saying this is a dominant problem, but it is a problem in a smaller segment of people who lead the church. Is that when they get all this freedom, they don't know what to do with themselves.
For sure.
You know what I mean? They haven't had, like you mentioned, the college experience, kind of like the sandbox.
So they go through like a Rumspringer phase where shit gets kind of wild.
Yeah, but at least it's somewhat controlled. Like you have hopefully good buddies that can, help bring you home and throw you on the couch after that experience, like drinking or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there are some people that go off the rails.
Of course.
And so that's unfortunate, but I put that on the doorstep of Mormonism. Like it's Mormonism. I'm sorry. It just maybe you can help me pronounce this word. Infantilizes adult. Period.
It does, yeah. And it takes away your sovereignty.
Yeah.
So and to be sovereign is to be adult. That's kind of the thing, right? It's like that's what coming into manhood or womanhood is supposed to be about. And that's why I'm calling into question like what are our rites of passage as a culture, as a society, right? In Mormonism, it's like, getting the priesthood or which basically just means now you have like this magical power which women can't have.
Mm-hmm.
So you're separate from the women in some way, right? And that's like your path to manhood. And then maybe then marriage is a path or another rite of passage, a temple ordinance or whatever, right? But in more broad society, we don't really have a useful rite of passage experience. Like the ones that we have right now, I don't see them as productive in any way.
Yeah, like you get your mission call. And you go on your mission.
Right.
But it's just crazy, like how you're treated as a child, as a missionary. You are literally an adult.
Right.
And they take your passport if you're in a foreign country.
That's trippy.
Yeah, you have to ask for your passport back. They claim other reasons for it, but they take your fucking passport. You know,
Right.
like you have, and if you want to get a trip home, they make you pay for it to go home, even though you're here as an adult.
This
on
is a
volunteer.
$100 billion organization,
Yeah,
by the
like
way.
it's not gonna hurt him one bit.
Yeah. We need to talk about that more in a bit.
Yeah, but it's just crazy. Like I call a mission a cult within a cult.
Right.
My own policy is I don't mess with the missionaries. I don't want to, you know what I mean? Like when they approach me, I ask them, you know, how long are you out in the field? What would happen if you left the church and you came home? How would your family and community treat you?
Mm-hmm.
And then based on the answers to those questions, I usually, most often, just say, look, if you're having a good time out there, just enjoy your mission, love the people, learn about the culture.
Learn the language.
Yeah, do a lot of personal development. So
Yeah.
it's not just
And
100% Mormonism.
Yeah.
But if you're miserable and you're having a hard time and you're having like serious doubts, then come talk to me.
Okay, I gotcha. But yeah, it seems like some Mormons or ex-Mormons actually that I've talked to have like a kind of a warm place in their heart for their mission.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
like
that
especially if they're return missionaries.
Yeah.
They know how hard it is.
Yeah.
And they know that these are really just kids.
Yeah, but like going to South America and learning Spanish and being
Yes.
in a new place, like that's got to be the highlight of being a Mormon for sure.
Oh yeah, like my dad served his mission in Chile and learned Spanish, and it just completely changed his life. Just had a profound effect on him. Like his love for, you know, the Hispanic people, and like he uses Spanish every single day. The funny thing is that I grew up hearing Spanish every day from him, but I can barely give you probably 20, 30 words out of Spanish because I was too busy trying to learn English. you know?
Yeah. One thing at a time. I'm trying to learn Spanish right now, actually, but it's something that it took a trip to Colombia to make that like a thing where I was like, whoa, I really want to learn this now. This is cool. So I love travel, and I think it's one of the best ways to. It's an inquiry into yourself.
Yeah.
Because it's taking you out of your pond, out of the environment, and now you got to like see you more clearly.
Yeah, and to add to that, like my dad is the most traveled person I know. Like he's been, oh my God, like he's traveled so much for business. But as a kid, he would come home and tell me stories about the Soviet Union. Like he went to the USSR. He was there when the wall came down.
In Berlin? Wow.
And so I got to experience these world events before the internet, with him coming home and sharing those stories and stuff.
Yeah, that's
and
pretty
so
cool.
So even though I didn't travel to those countries as often as he did or whatever, just hearing him sharing them, it was almost as if I was there.
Yeah.
So it's not just the traveler, it's the traveler coming back to the pond and sharing his adventures with the people around him.
Yeah, definitely. Travel's a huge catalyst for evolving your own world, because I mean that you're going to start to realize that you're wearing spectacles that are actually painting your worldview, and then because you'll come in contact with tons of people who don't have the same spectacles on, you know. But when you're just growing up in Utah the whole time, everyone's got on the same fucking glasses, man.
Yeah, exactly.
Everyone I meet's got the same glasses on, and it's like,
I think so I'm kind of glad. I'm glad that I grew up in Southern California, that I was surrounded by a lot of non-Mormons.
yeah, you were.
So that helped a lot, but I definitely see a point about.
Well, I grew up in Colorado City, Centennial Park. I mean, we're talking about everybody.
Yeah.
95% of people having the same opinion about Joseph Smith.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, in that pond, like, I'm not going to change my mind. I'm just not going to change my mind in that pond. So as soon as I leave the pond, then I can change my mind. Do you see what I mean? Then I can see what the thing is. I can see the perspective that I've been steeped in. Like a fish doesn't know it's in water.
But did you make so where does free choice come into that?
That's a great question.
So did you make the choice that Joseph Smith was a cool guy? I mean, like, so it's just really interesting. Like, I mean, it's just
we have freedom to practice our religion, which is another way of saying we have freedom to like
be programmed and follow whatever in our environment.
And as soon as I come in with a different perspective, then
you're out of here.
Walls go up. Yeah, for sure. And I've experienced that with my own family.
Yeah.
Not like I don't want to sound like a victim, because I'm not. I have a great life. But like, Lost Boys, where they're actually like kicked out.
Yeah.
And it's a different story, and so I hope that now in 2022 things are getting easier to be, for lack of a better term, ex-Mormon. You know what I mean?
I think so. I think so. Like, there are people like Mormon Stories, John Delan, Mormon Spectrum. Like, there are groups and people that have created these frameworks to help people. I like to call it. They create soft landings.
Yeah.
And we're trying to create an infrastructure that, with the number one goal of ensuring, like, doing our best to create a safe landing for the individual, as well as helping them to keep their relationships intact.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times people make stupid mistakes. Like, they as soon as they learn about Joseph Smith, then they just, like, download on their spouses and that are not ready for it.
Right.
And it can just ruin.
You're describing me.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I definitely had a lot more, tenacity, I guess, about it, or anger and that kind of thing. And I think that's actually healthy. I think it's healthy. It's part of the process.
It's important to have anger, because anger helps drive action.
It does.
It helps get you through this really, really fucked up, messy process.
Yes, and going into that, exactly, it gets you through the darkness.
But the trick is,
don't stay
after
there.
After serve this purpose, like, let's move on to other emotions.
Yeah, exactly. And there's nobody wants to be the lifelong anti-Mormon person or anti-anything person.
Yeah,
like, nobody wants their life to be about, like, not that.
Yeah.
You want it to be about you. And so, but to your point about, like, what comes next. So for me, and this is just my own way of kind of articulating this, and it's sort of like, I've been doing a lot of, like, kind of reflecting and trying to identify what I'm trying to do here with True North, right? Mm-hmm. And we're in my van right now. This is my first podcast, like, in the van, by the way.
Yeah, so, it's awesome. The van is just amazing.
Thanks, man.
And we're out here in beautiful American Fork Canyon.
Yeah, it's pretty. It's cool. And I'm looking forward to doing, like, when it's a little warmer, when we have, like, in the future, I'm going to be doing a bunch of podcasts right out in front. And it'll be fun being out in nature more.
You got, like, a sweet setup. So
thanks, appreciate that. But in getting the van and deciding to take on True North as, like, True North Project as this podcast that I'm going to be traveling around North America for this year, and trying to meet all of the visionaries and creatives and artists and thinkers and builders and, like, the people that inspire me, right? In doing that, I'm thinking, like, well, what are the tenets of True North? Like, what is it that I'm doing? What's the flag I'm waving, or so to speak? And we already talked about the first of the big pillars to me, which is sovereignty, and trying to upregulate my own sovereignty. Like, this is a selfish project. It's like, I want to become more sovereign. I want to meet people that I think will have signal and actually help me become more sovereign. Also, why not open source this, and with a couple mics, let anybody have access to that conversation? Why not? Awesome. It's cool technology. We should share.
Yeah.
It's and do it for free. Like, give people access. It's cool. So sovereignty, so that I can become more aware, autonomous, and powerful, like, upregulate those things. But what happens when you become sovereign? Like, what happens when you have your free agent with power, with capacity to do something? Well, that's just potential waiting for, like, manifestation to happen. And to me, the next kind of phase or pillar, whatever you want to call it, another way to do it would be this trinity of being, doing, becoming. Be sovereign. That's your state of being, sovereign. Do, or create authentically. Where does creation come from? Well, it's an inside out type of experience. You know what I mean? Like, it's something grabs you, and like, when you get out of the way is when creation happens, right? Yeah. Like, it's something that emerges, and it's an emergent property of you as a person, and you can create authentically that way. And that's art, when it's really authentic, no matter what your medium is, whether you're a scholar or a builder or a teacher. It's art when you're creating authentically. And the becoming aspect of this trinity, to me, a cool word that kind of embodies this is ikigai, which is a Japanese word which they kind of use to find meaning or purpose in life. And ikigai kind of like lies at the crossroads of your worldview, what like how you see the world, plus your gifts, like your capacities, plus what you're passionate about, what you love doing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Plus a final element, which is important, what the world actually needs, right? So it's like all of those things come together, and that's like your reason for being. It's like what the world needs you to be and what you most authentically are, like what you want to be.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of fascinating because it's like in this crazy universe where we have the most like insane, spectrum of uniqueness.
Yeah.
Where like you are uniquely you. No other human is anything like you, right? There might be some similarities, but you have like been shaped by so many unquantifiable variables. It's such a complex thing that it's emerged Jeremy Reynolds, right? It's emerged Christian. So that creates a thing which can only I can fulfill my particular ikigai. It's for me. Nobody else could do it.
Yeah, and that's why it's futile to compare yourself to others.
Yeah.
Like only compare to who you were yesterday.
Yeah, it's a great way.
And the day before.
Yeah, exactly. I like that. So become sovereign or be sovereign, create authentically, become ikigai. Like step into that eventually. Like it's an unfolding. It's a becoming. It's not a permanent state of being. Like it's not a oh, now I've arrived. Here I am. Right. Mm-hmm. It's an unfolding or like, and so the Japanese, they don't see it as an end point. Like now I got it. I'll retire. And kick up the feet and relax. Like, no, you do it till you die. Like that's your purpose. Like it's what you do,
Yeah, I love it. Like the Japanese got a lot of things right.
Yeah. Maybe some things wrong. Like World War II is a little weird, but
yeah, exactly.
No, I'm just kidding. Like the Japanese culture is fucking awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I just want
to.
I just want to go there and visit.
I got lucky. I was this is how weird the universe is, right? So I was in Cambodia with my girlfriend doing a yoga retreat where we were becoming yoga teachers, certified or whatever. And that finished up, and we were going to go to Indonesia and spend a month or two in Bali doing some diving. That was the plan. So fly to Indonesia, get to the airport in Medan, and they stopped me at the airport. And they're like, you can't come in to the country. Well, I'm already here. Like I'm in Indonesia, but you can't come in out of the airport because my passport was going to expire in 5 months and 26 days. And you have to have a passport that's good for at least 6 months to get into the country.
Wow, interesting.
Which is super fucking weird because the visa's 30 days. So it's like you have a 30-day visa, but you have to have a passport for 6 months. So they detained me, and I spent the night in a cell.
What?
Yeah. Luckily, I was by myself in the cell, and we weren't in Kuala Lumpur, or I would have been in a cell with like 40 people, which would have been rough. But I ended up getting separated, and Lily and I were like, this is like, we kind of rolled with it, and we were like, we had already talked about traveling solo at some point, and we're like, this is universe's way of saying it's time. So you go to Indonesia, you need to do your thing. I'm not going to stop you. Like, I want you to go to Bali because she really wanted to go and do the diving thing. And I didn't know what I was going to do, but I had this weird sort of peace about it. Like, this is fine. And anyways, I spend the night in the cell. They ship me back to Cambodia, which the place that we flew from is like the worst place in the world. Like, it's this place where this town where China has sort of like come in and bought and everything up. And there was literally like 100 high-rises going in all at the same time, all under construction. Like, it was just the craziest thing I've ever seen. It was dystopian. It was very strange. Trash just like going into the ocean, and there's like this small little place that's being turned into like casino land for China. It's very, very hard to be around that. And they sent me right back there, and I was like, fuck, this is terrible. So I'm doing all this research in Cambodia trying to figure out where I can go. And all these Asian countries have the same policy. It's like 6-month passport. And the only one that doesn't that I can find is Japan, because they're like more US friendly, because we have like Navy bases there. So I figure out how to get a flight to Japan. And next thing I know, I'm going to Japan. Next thing I know, like I actually have friends who were going to be in Japan the same time as me that I can meet up with, which is super cool. And I find out I'm flying in the best time to be in Japan, which is Sakura. So I'm flying in during like the 3 weeks out of the year where it's just cherry blossoms all the time. Like,
what time of year is that?
I think it's March, I believe. Yeah, end of March, early April, I believe, is when I was there.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah, and then so I had an amazing 2 weeks in Japan. Had a great go. Like loved it, and I'd love to go back. So it ended up working out like randomly.
Wow, that's an awesome story. Yeah, I just want to go there. Mm-hmm. It just seems like a super fascinating place. So
yeah, it's interesting. Well, there's so much shit that I have here that we didn't touch on, and we don't need to because we've gone deep enough.
My feeling is it's one of those things that you kind of have to go into the weeds with and look at visual, like images and click on links and go down the rabbit hole there and all that kind of stuff. It's like a very personal experience.
It is, for sure. The one thing I would say I think is worth mentioning is this. I think all things sort of lead you to like this when you realize you zoom out like after you read all this stuff, you go deep and you're like, okay, all right, so what does this mean?
It's like a mind melt.
It is. It's a mind melt. And you kind of have to reframe your perspective, but it's like, well, what are the implications of this? What does this mean? Well, what does it mean for the LDS Church? Well, what is the church now?
Yeah, you start to ask very, very personal questions.
Yeah, and one of those questions is, why the fuck does the LDS Church have $100 billion under management?
Oh, that's just the conservative. Like, they have hundreds of billions of dollars in assets. So
yeah, if you count the assets up, but like, I mean, they've got
they do have like a slush fund.
But this has been like
they trade like Tesla and Apple and all
of course, stuff. Probably Bitcoin now.
Yeah, exactly.
So this has just been kind of kept quiet, right, for the longest time, and now it's like the best kept secret ever. Like I was reading an article or just checked out an article from the Wall Street Journal that was just like best kept investment secret in the investment world. It was just like LDS Church has billions and billions of dollars, and it's just kind of been like kept quiet.
Yeah. And like it would be right up there in the top 5 or 10 corporations on the planet in terms of
mega power.
Yeah, like right up there with Apple and all those guys.
Yeah,
and it's a freaking religion. So
it's a pyramid.
Yeah,
where it's all coming to the top. Like all of the so you have the wide base of all the members, probably millions. I don't know how many members.
So they say 16 million and some change, but they done studies and all that. The real number of active Mormons would be somewhere around 4, 5, 6 million active Mormons.
Wow, still a lot, probably.
But the vast majority of the members on the rolls are inactives or don't contact me.
But they're trying to count them among the fold, exactly. So they can say that we're huge. But still, 4 or 5 million people all paying tithing is giving you.
Well, maybe not drill down from there. So,
right, so it's not all paying tithing.
Realistically, probably 900,000, a million Mormons pay tithing.
Okay, and that generates something like what, 6-7 billion a year in revenues.
Yeah, a shit ton of money.
It's a shit ton. It's a shit ton.
It's amazing.
It's a ton of money. It's crazy that many people are still gung ho to pay, but I'll bet you that they don't all know.
You got the guys like Mitt Romney and the Huntsmans and all these guys.
Some wealthy people.
Yeah,
doing
paying money as well. So.
Yeah, but to the point though is like if everybody who's paying tithing, let's say the 900,000 or million people who are, knew that they were paying to an organization that had $100 billion in cash, like just chilling, like investment status, Ensign Peak Management Fund, whatever it's called, right?
Ensign Peak, yeah.
Yeah, so it's literally like a hedge fund that's just accumulated a massive capital pool.
There was another article that showed up, I just read within the last few days. They made, don't count me, I believe it's $22 billion during the pandemic.
Jesus fuck.
They made a shit ton of money during the pandemic.
Made some good bets.
Yeah, but meanwhile, you need some food. Well, you need to make sure you show up on Saturdays to scrub the toilet, and then we'll give you access to the bishop's storehouse.
Is that what it takes? So, and then
Well, I mean, it depends on the bishop.
for sure, but I see what you mean. And the point is like you've got needy people, and those people are encouraged to pay their tithing before all else, right?
Yeah, like it's a very disturbing pattern and what they require their members to do for tithing, especially in third worlds and stuff.
Yeah, so when you start to reorient yourself and see through a different lens and start to see like, okay, now I can consider.
And by the way, like remember we talked about the pandemic opening people's eyes?
Yeah.
Well, when you don't go to church every Sunday, you don't get the slip with the tithing to the bishop.
So maybe you stop paying.
You kind of miss so much. Then you start to see your
how much you're paying.
Your bank account's gotten bigger.
Yeah. And then you might have to write a tithing check that's accumulated after a couple months.
Yeah.
And you're like, ooh, it's harder to write this check.
That was a lot of money. And you start to think, well, what am I? And then maybe you read the article.
Yeah.
What? The church made $22 billion, or the church has $100 billion slush fund that they're buying Tesla and Apple and GameStop with.
Yeah.
Why am I making this 10 grand tithing check? Or whatever. It's
a great question. Those are the questions we should be asking. And it's so $100 billion under management plus all of the assets. That's, to me, right there, a huge indicator as to what this thing really is.
Yeah, but you have to remember it depends on people's values. So there are some people in the church, and I know a lot of them.
Well, clearly,
they would take this data, and be like, that's just evidence that the church is true, that God's watching over, because all this wealth is ensuring the church.
Okay, but by that logic, Apple is the supreme religion or whatever, right?
Yeah, like it's a prosperity gospel paradigm, but yeah, I can see people. I know some people that think that way. That they don't have a problem with
them having the money. So and correct me like if I'm wrong, but isn't the rationale for having it so that when Jesus returns, we shall have enough? I don't know. Apparently, he needs the money.
It's just safe for a rainy day to have. Mormonism is a very doomsday religion. Like it's in the name.
Yeah.
The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter Day.
Yes, the end of the days.
Which means
destructions.
Days. Like shit's gonna hit the fan.
It's very rapture ideology based.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's a very millennial type thing.
Yeah.
So it's that mindset of there's going to be a time where serious shit hits the fan, and it would be good to have all these resources in play.
Sure.
I mean, but and
like if shit hits the fan, like the money isn't really the resources, but I think they have the actual resources as well. Like they have the real estate, they have the people, they have the churches and the storehouses and all the stuff. Yeah.
But and there are people like the church is gonna die. I mean, everybody's gonna leave it. My position is, I think they're gonna lose a lot more members over time. But it's gonna turn more into the Scientology setup, where they have a much lower membership,
but higher donation base.
But they're just gonna be just fine with all the billions that they have.
I see. And in Scientology,
and just the nature of the United States and how we have our, like free speech and freedom of religion and all that, it's very, very hard to sue the church for liability and get rewarded and all that stuff.
That makes sense.
Unless you're a kid that got molested in the Boy Scouts, then you'll get lucky to get a settlement. But
hopefully it's not as bad as the Catholic priest problem.
Oh yeah, exactly.
That's a serious fucking problem.
Yeah. Church is richer than the Catholic Church, by the way. So.
No shit. No shit. Really?
Yeah.
Wow. That's paradigm shifting. It's crazy. It's crazy. It's literally like, and it all got spurred because, okay, we didn't go into this because we skipped over the polygamy stuff, but that was going to take us down into like sort of the end of Joseph Smith's life, which is people were pissed off.
Oh yeah.
Enough to kill him.
Oh, like he was
murdered by an angry mob.
Wives and
so he had 30
sisters and
he had 34 wives, 11 of them married to other living men, probably without their knowledge or consent.
Some of them were aware of that, but some of them were. So.
Right. And then a couple of those wives were 14.
Helen Mark Kimball was 14.
Right.
There's another one that was 12. I forget her name exactly.
She was 12?
12. But she, I forget her name. But the 14-year-old is what most people know. And the church has an essay. The plural marriage in Kirtland and Nauvoo, I believe it's called.
Uh-huh.
But they have a phrase in there. Helen Mar Kimball was basically, the phrase is she was a few months shy of her 15th birthday.
Damn.
So that shows you like how uncomfortable and embarrassed they are about this little fact.
They're trying to make it like sound like she was 15.
Well, yeah.
I know,
like,
she was
closer
basically
to
15.
15, guys.
Yeah, she's not 14, 15. So it's you say in the letter, like it's Warren Jeff's territory, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And it totally is. I totally agree with you. So when you start to see it in context, and it's hard to do at first. I mean, for me to, like, I grew up super close to Warren Jeff's society, right? So ultimate bad guy, even in our eyes. Like, we're just across the hill. Warren Jeff's is like, what he's doing to the people in Carter City is considered, like, horrific. And while simultaneously, Joseph Smith's on the highest pedestal of all time.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? He's literally on the same pedestal with Jesus. Like, he's put himself there. So, and he does this. I can't remember the scripture, but he actually in scripture puts him on the pedestal. But the point is, that's cognitive dissonance, like, to the utmost. Like, you've got like one reality where it's like, for Warren Jeffs to do this horrific thing and to take advantage of these young girls and to steal other men's wives and to do, it's a horrific. But then Joseph Smith did it maybe to a lesser degree if you're using like raw numbers. Like you do, they have this infographic on the letter which shows the comparison side by side. But it's definitely a conversation like it's Warren Jeff's territory.
Yeah, like Joseph Smith got killed. He just wasn't able to get up to that level.
He would have kept going.
Like if you just would have given him more time.
Yeah, people stopped him because it was more of a Wild West where you can actually just kind of like, when people do that type of shit, you can just kind of kill them. Like a mob can, like back in the day of mobs, where mobs would just show up and shoot you. Like fuck this guy. Like they just shot him.
Yeah, it's just, they were pissed. Like he was just, and you know, the way that the LDS Church, the propaganda around it is with all his hopping to these different places, he was just being persecuted by the law.
Yeah, exactly. Which makes him more of a martyr.
What was really happening is just trying to escape. Prosecution.
Right, and we didn't mention this, but it was actually linking. This is why I wanted to bring up polygamy in the first place. His trying to hide his practice of polygamy and polyandry. He was getting 31 people to sign an affidavit saying he was monogamous. Like, a lot of those people were his wives and like people who were also polygamous.
Some of them were included, and a lot of like several of them knew, like, you know, that it wasn't true.
Yeah, but
and he also made a statement like, I've been accused of having more than one wife. When I can only count one. You know, like,
I have the quote right here actually. What a thing it is for a man to be accused of committing adultery and having 7 wives when I can only find one. I am the same man and as innocent as I was 14 years ago, and I can prove them all perjurers. The reason I wanted to go into this is more for like the people that where I'm from, because, you know, they're practicing polygamy. And so they see Joseph Smith, when I say 34 wives, they're like, yeah, see? Like, he was doing it, see? And they're like, this is good, right? So, like, we're trying to actually hold true to the thing that originally was, and the church lost it, right? The LDS church lost it. And we're trying to hang on to, like, the real thing and keep it alive in the world. So I thought this was very interesting. This quote from the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants, Section 101. Inasmuch as this Church of Christ has been reproached with the crime of fornication and polygamy, we declare that we believe that one man should have one wife and one woman but one husband, except in case of death, when either is at liberty to marry again.
Yeah. So what was happening is during the Nauvoo period in the 1830s and part of the 1840s, is that there were two churches in operation. There was the public-facing one,
right,
which what you read is the monogamy.
Yeah.
And then there was the underground one, where Joseph Smith was, you know, in secret grabbing these women to be his wives, and some, you know, girls and teenagers, doing crazy shit like the testing. For example, Helen Mar Kimball, her dad was what was his name? It's on the tip of my tongue.
Heber C. Kimball?
Yeah, Heber C. Kimball. He did like a test where he wanted to marry his wife. I think it's Vellante.
Oh, you're saying Joseph Smith wanted to marry Kimball's wife.
Yeah.
And he tested him by saying, I want
Like the
Valet.
Lord has commanded me to
Valet.
take your wife.
Yeah.
And it just wrecked.
Yeah.
It just wrecked him. It just wrecked Heber. I mean, for 3 days and 3 nights, he was just beside himself.
Right.
And then after all that, Joseph Smith's like, just kidding.
Well, after Heber said, okay, here she is.
Yeah.
And then he's like weeping because he's so proud of Heber for like, it's basically like the Abrahamic thing where it's like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm willing to kill my fucking firstborn for you, God.
Yeah, which is
because
disturbing in and of itself.
It's human sacrifice. I don't know how that ever becomes okay.
Like Christianity is based on human sacrifice.
Of course it is.
The very center of it is Jesus.
Sacrifice.
Sacrifice.
And you should feel bad about it. And
yeah, because
cry.
you're a piece of shit. Like, something's wrong with you. You're not worthy. Blah, 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 blah. Again, I'm not a Christian. So.
Yeah, I've had to do some soul searching because I was named Samuel Christian, which is Samuel is Hebrew, and I think it means something like name of God, and Christian, obviously, follower of Christ. So it's like, what do you do with that? What do you do? With that?
So what's your new name? Like in ex-mormons, we joke around and play on this. Like in the temple, you get a new name when you go for the first time.
Oh, really?
And so we all have like a name that was given to us in the temple. And
interesting.
So just kind of playing on that. Like, so what's your new name going to be now that you?
Yeah, I have reservations of like going down like the. I am a star child. Call me star child. Like it's kind of corny, but honestly, like I dove into it, and there was a moment where I was like, should I just change my fucking name? And there's plenty of doxators. It's not like they're gonna miss having one less doxator, right? There's thousands of them now. So it's like, I don't know, when you look into what Christ actually, like, to me, the story behind it, I see more of another example of, like, we have various examples throughout history of a being coming into like a higher state of awareness. You might call it Christ consciousness, which is this awareness that, like, at base level, we're all one, and so you should love thy neighbor as yourself. What he's saying there is like, you're the same. You're cut from the same cloth. Just like you can have individual waves in an ocean. All the waves are of the ocean.
Yeah.
And we are all of God, or of the universe, or of whatever you want to say. So, and Alan Watts has an amazing lecture on this.
Yeah, Alan Watts is amazing.
He's the GOAT. He's my favorite. He has an amazing lecture on Jesus and his religion. It's like an hour long, and I can link it in the show notes if anyone's interested. But he goes into like more fundamentally what Jesus was getting at, limited by the worldview he was talking to, like what he was part of, and the language involved, right? And he goes into a little bit of the Hebrew, like the Arabic, like the actual words, the translations of it, and Son of God, like in a world where God can only be Father. You see what I mean? He's basically saying like the same thing that Buddha is saying, the same thing that any mystic is saying. And they've glimpsed something fundamental, which is that this illusion of the separate self locked up in the bag of skin, separate and on probation, separate from everything else, that's actually the illusion. So to pierce through that illusion would be liberation, Maya, right? Sorry, moksha. Maya is the illusion. Moksha is liberation from the illusion. And it's like to see clearly for a moment and glimpse that, oh, I am God in the fundamental way that I am the universe. Like I'm a fractal element of the universe witnessing itself right now.
Yeah.
Which is kind of fucking beautiful. It's kind of crazy, and it kind of makes you laugh when you like think about it. So, anyways, the whole idea of being Christian. Do I see myself as someone who promotes human sacrifice, and I needed someone to die for my sins, and I need to be baptized, et cetera, et cetera? No, of course not. But do I see something like Christ consciousness, this idea of love for your neighbor, of you and your neighbor are the same? I can see that as being like a valuable thing to live your life by, for sure.
Yeah, and that's, I agree. But at the same time, you also have to remember some of the little details. Like Jesus also taught to forsake your family to follow him.
Yeah, for
which
sure.
is a piece of shit move, you know.
Yeah, but you also have to question what do you mean by Jesus said? Because you're talking about like a book that's been, regurgitated.
Exactly.
And that's just one flavor, the Roman Catholic flavor, right?
Yeah,
and in 300 AD, when Constantine silenced all of the other sects, all the other Christian cults, the Gnostics and everyone else, right? And then you get like these buried gospels that are coming up in the desert, and gospels of Thomas, and the things that just didn't exist in the mainstream Bible.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of, I mean, we see through the glass darkly, as Paul would say. Like there's no.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree.
I think that you can't deny that billions of humans walking around, revering the concept of Jesus, probably for a reason. Like just like Buddha, just like any person that's going to make waves like that through history, probably was had reached some level of consciousness that's non-ordinary for most people. That's just a guess. Who knows? So anyways, like the time will tell if the name sticks. I don't know.
It's just interesting, like what's going on in the biblical scholarship community. Like now they're starting to, well, not now, but like there's just a debate. Is Jesus historical? Is he not? Blah blah blah. I'm not really interested in the historical aspect of it. I'm just more of like what we talked about. The philosophy of Christianity just does not align with my values. Like I think we're perfect just as we are.
Yeah. So like
we're
the whole
worthy just as we are. We don't need somebody to sacrifice for us.
Of course.
So that's where my disconnect comes from.
No, yeah, I'm trying to decouple the maybe mysticism or like insight of like, let's say something which is fairly mystical, like Christ's teachings, right? Fairly mystical, like decoupling that from like the whole Abrahamic tradition, the patriarchy, the fucking, domesticate yourself into this lineage of, you know what I mean?
Sense.
Like it's totally, to me, like that was just the world in which he was incarnated.
Yeah.
Well, and so, but who knows? Like maybe the whole thing is actually more just like an archetypal myth, and Jesus wasn't really as much of a man as it was like an amalgamation of qualities and stories going into one book, right? Because it was actually written, the first gospel was written like 3 decades after his death.
Oh yeah, and some of them was written like close to 100 years
Yeah,
after.
Book of John's like 100 years later.
Yeah, and the gospels contradict each other. There's contradictions between some of the stories and the gospel. So
Brian Murarescu's work, you really should check out The Immortality Key. You'd be fascinated. He dives deeper into the Book of John because it's written in Greek, and there's all these ties into like the Dionysian sort of tradition and this whole psychedelic wine thing. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's just yeah.
It's been a real pleasure talking to you, man.
Yeah, likewise.
I just realized we're over 3 hours. So
holy shit, 3 hours.
Yeah.
Wow, man.
Time flew, and I could keep talking to you. And we, like I said, we didn't dive into a bunch of this stuff.
But I feel like that's something that's personal for people. Everybody has their different buttons, different. You know what I mean? Like maybe the Book of Abraham is to one person, whereas another person is like, man, I'm more disturbed by the polygamy, or I'm more disturbed by the anachronism.
Sure.
It's like a combination lock. Everybody has a combination.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons why the apologists hate me so much with the CES Letter.
You put it all together in one place.
Yeah, like I just talk about the whole forest.
Yeah.
And then I say, you step back and you look at the whole damn forest.
Yeah.
So I just don't just stay in the weeds and looking at individual trees. I'm saying, let's look at the full cumulative sum total of this, and ask yourself: is this really what a supreme being of the universe would get himself involved with?
Right. And do I want to double down on this and take it to my grave? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is this what I'm going to really double down on?
Do you want to invest your precious time?
Oh, man, it's so precious. It's like, if you're really living, is that the best? Is this the best game to play?
The best use of your time.
Is it the best game we're playing right now?
Yeah. And so that's just where I come from. I just say, look, I agree with Clark. if we have the truth, then no harm can come from investigation. If we have not the truth, it ought to be harmed. I agree 100%.
Yeah, that's scientific thinking right there.
Yeah, so let's explore this.
Yeah.
And
it's ironic that it came from a president of the church or whatever.
Well, he was a counselor in the first presidency.
Okay.
Yeah, which is funny. But back then, they thought the truth was on their side until the Book of Abraham showed up. Like the
dominoes started falling.
But yeah, it's this whole thing. It's just it's been a wild, crazy ride. So.
Yeah, I can imagine, man. Well, you in particular were a catalyst for me to start my journey, like really cross the threshold into the unknown and take the call to adventure in a lot of ways.
That's awesome, but I want to make something clear here. Never ever let me or anybody else take away the credit. You did all the hard work.
For sure.
You opened up the document. You read it. You examined it. You thought about it. You weighed it. You made the action, like you took the action steps to liberate your mind in life.
That's true.
So never ever let anybody, especially me, take that away from
you. That's the whole thing, is like in the quest for sovereignty, nobody can bestow sovereignty upon you. Like you have to take it. You have to step into it, right?
Exactly.
It's a thing that has to emerge from you. And that's what I'm trying to be, is like more sovereign, so I can create more authentically.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So hopefully some good can come out of this conversation, and hopefully. I
think so. I think it was a great conversation. I think a lot of people are going to get value from it.
Yeah. Well, I certainly did. So once again, man, thank you. I appreciate everything you're doing. It's cool to be able to actually meet you in person and sit down and talk to you about this. And for me, it's kind of like it's a thing I needed to do, because now I feel like I've sort of, that's the best way to say this. Like I've known for a while, like it's important to me that like I get like this conversation out, right? Whatever this is, like to get this out, because I feel like now I can just like move on. Yeah. Like for me, I really don't want to be identified with as, or I don't want to just like get hung up on this, because to me, it's actually pretty silly. Like it's like once you zoom out and you
graduated.
Yeah, exactly. You zoom out and you're like, oh, there's just so much cooler shit to talk about. And we can go move on, and we can go like into, I want to go meet like, a bunch of other people who were like pushing the envelope on other paradigms, you know what I mean? Yeah. Outside of just Mormonism, because we can stretch way far. Like we can stretch way beyond all this.
One of the crazy things that happens when you leave Mormonism and you go out into the world is you realize, wow, Mormonism is so small and irrelevant. Like most people don't even care or pay attention to it or whatever.
Yeah, it's not on a lot of people's radar.
Yeah, like it's like I heard a phrase that I thought was pretty accurate and funny. Mormonism is a margin error. so like like in statistics, there's like a margin of error, like 2 to 5% or whatever, that you just kind of throw off, And Mormonism is like less than 1% of the world's population at that.
It's like plus or minus some Mormons.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just so irrelevant, but
well,
at
Utah,
the same time,
Utah
to us, it was 100% of our world.
And if you're listening, it's probably relevant to you.
Exactly.
And the thing is in Utah, it's still the dominant zeitgeist. It's like the dominant narrative, and that's something that I want to change. Not because, like, I don't have like this like desire to like go to war with people.
Exactly.
But I want to evolve beyond it. Like it'd be cool to see a bunch of fucking art and cool like progress. Like what are we here as humans to do on Earth?
Mm-hmm.
Like we're in this unique, crazy time where like we have this peak technology and access to information and collaborative, like with the capacities we have collectively to do stuff.
Yeah,
it's a small window, and I don't think it's guaranteed that it sticks around.
Yeah.
In fact, a lot of what I'm going to be exploring on this podcast is like, I don't know if you're familiar with like the Game B community or anything like that, but yeah, the whole idea that the Game A is actually the civilization that we're in right now is dated, and it's on a course of self-termination. Like we don't have forever in this window. So it's like the sooner that we snap out of it, like the old ideological stuff that's got us like with our head in the sand.
Yeah, like religion has served its purpose.
Yes, it has.
It has helped us with creating civilization and working together as communities and working to a common goal and all that kind of stuff. But
you kind of left out like, crusading to murder all the non-believers exactly. and burning all the witches at the stake.
Exactly. Exactly. But it has become a glue to get communities to work with each other.
It's created cohesion.
Yeah, but it's in the 21st century with nuclear weapons. Sam Harris talks about this a lot too. Maybe it's becoming more of a liability. So
yeah, I totally agree. You got to shake off the cobwebs of the old paradigms, right? Yeah. And we're in a new paradigm. We're emerging a new paradigm right now. Yeah. It feels like, and COVID felt like an accelerator, like a catalyst for that.
Yeah, like I think we're underestimating the power of AI and what it's going to do to our civilization. Yeah, what it can, the stuff that it can solve, that it can, calculate and factor in, and like it's probably going to be the closest to like a natural God that we've ever encountered.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm a huge proponent or fan of what's happening in the blockchain space, and what's happening around DAOs right now, and the emergence of like the new platform for collective intelligence to emerge, and collective coordination, and sort of like a cognitive collective. Do you know what I mean? That can take action and coordinate. Yeah. It's a new thing. It's crazy. It used to be like the unconscious market sort of just does stuff, and now we can like collectively, I mean, I say now we can, but it's like this, it's just beginning. Yeah. We're in the very beginning of this new chapter. And so it's really exciting to see like what the new type of, because you mentioned religion as this way to organize and coordinate and to bring some people into like some type of common ground. But at the cost of so much else, right?
Yeah. When I was saying that, I was thinking more of like the medieval ages. Yeah. Like when the Catholic Church was the dominant, both political and religious, but like they were able to organize.
I would just say that the reason we call that medieval and dark ages is probably because of that religious thinking that took us there.
But think of like the stuff that showed up, like the printing press. I'm not crediting the Catholic Church, but it created the environment to where it helped like complex create the society for all this other stuff. Like Martin Luther, revolting against the church and helping to spark the Renaissance. Like for people to realize it's okay to disagree with the powers that be, and so it's complicated, but what I'm trying to get at is religion has helped in certain times of history, but it's at this point it's a liability. So.
Well, or we need it needs to be updated. We need to figure out what is the new collective meaning-making apparatus of our species, right? So first we got to figure out collective sense-making, because everyone's kind of looking around like, what the fuck's even going on? Trying to figure out like what's real. Yeah. So sense-making and choice-making are right up there on the top priorities, and meaning-making as well. Yeah. So we got a lot cut out for us, and it's just a really crazy, exciting time to be alive. So for me, this conversation's like, okay, cool. Let's put a pin in the Mormonism thing, and we can move on to like other stuff.
Yeah, and that's been my life the last couple of years. Is the term I use is just graduating from Mormonism, but graduating from ex-mormonism.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, yeah, I just don't consider myself an ex-Mormon. I consider myself Jeremy, right? A human being, right? And so there's just so much in this world that's, to me, more interesting to talk about,
I couldn't agree more. But this has been interesting. This has been a great conversation.
Oh, yeah, it's been awesome.
For me, it's kind of a blast to the past, because I after like leaving, I distanced myself from it quite a bit, just out of like, I guess some sort of coping mechanism. But in preparation for this conversation, I dived back into it, and it's just like I find myself just like, like shaking my head, like, oh, this is so fucking obvious.
Yeah, but to be fair, Mormon history is fascinating.
It is, yeah.
Like especially like
it's American history, really.
Yeah, like it is really fascinating, and I think it's just a mind job to go from the Sunday school dignified version of it,
Yep.
and then to come out and be like, wow, like when you look at like the more multi-dimensional aspect of it, like the shades of gray and all the other details that were left out in the church's correlation. You're like, wow, like this stuff is really interesting, but god damn it, I was deceived, you know.
Yeah, but and not by insidious deceivers, most likely. It was most likely by ignorant or just like people who had been planted there.
I would agree with that to the extent that, like, I never blame, you know, my Sunday school teachers or my scout leaders or my young men's presidents or whatever. But I do blame the top 15.
Yeah, because there's got to be some people with awareness for sure. Yeah, there's got to be a bunch of people who have got like a bunch of other secrets that haven't come to light that are just kind of locked in under lock and key.
Yeah, and
there's a bunch of worse stuff coming out probably in the future.
This is not conspiracy theory. Like, it's a fact. A solid example of this is the seerstone, the brown seerstone that the church came out in 2015. Like, we have photographs of it, but they had it in their vault the whole time. They knew
it was rocking a hat the whole time.
Yeah. They knew of its existence, and it wasn't until 2015 they're like, oh yeah, here's the seerstone, guys.
Yeah. It's trippy to go from like this upbringing of like, oh yeah, Joseph Smith found these plates and translated off of them, to like, no one ever saw the plates, probably they didn't exist, and Joseph Smith just put his face into a hat that had a rock in it. And that's how he was inspired.
That he used to defraud his customers out of their money.
Fucking bananas. It's not bananas in the sense that I can't wrap my head around it, that it happened, because there's so many other people, like you said, in that time period doing that thing. You know, charlatans, treasure hunters, magical thinking, witch hunting, like all of that shit's like prevalent in that time period. It makes sense. What doesn't make sense, what's so fascinating, is that it caught fire and it exploded west.
Yeah.
Exploded west. So Joseph Smith, hiding his polygamy as best as he can, getting 30 people to sign an affidavit. I'm monogamous, you know, like the public-facing church is monogamous as fuck. And then the Nauvoo Inquisitor comes out and tries to basically publicly show what's going on.
By William Law, who was his counselor in the first presidency.
Right. So a publication, a newspaper comes out and publishes information about him being polygamous.
Yeah, and he ordered the destruction.
Yes. And it was destroyed, right?
Yes. Yeah. And then that's where that started the domino effect.
And 2 weeks later he was dead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, and because he was martyred.
Yeah.
Because he was martyred,
it just elevated exploded. The religion. It just took it to a whole new level.
It took it to a new level. It stratosphered it, and now here we are in American Fork Canyon, in a metropolis full of probably 1 million, or I don't know how many Mormons here, but it's a lot.
Yeah. Well, man, it's been great chatting with you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Let's wrap this bitch up. Thank you so much, Jeremy. Oh, and real quick, CESletter.org.
CESletter.org.
Is that the only place you want people to go to if they want to check this out more? Is there anything else you want to mention?
No, that's it. CESletter.org.
Cool, man. Well, appreciate it so much.
All right. Thanks so much, Kristen.